One particular night, when I was visiting Lake Minchin in New Zealand, I was on a backpacking trip, sometime in late February or early March. The trip was a spur-of-the-moment decision. I wanted to get away from the city and experience nature's serenity. Having heard so much about New Zealand's stunning landscapes and lakes, it seemed like the right escape. Lake Minchin was my choice for a moonlit swim. An old Kiwi friend from my university days had once told me it was a place of ethereal beauty. I imagined silvery waters under the moon and stars, a break from the busy city life. So there I was, standing at the edge of Lake Minchin, the cold sand scrunching between my toes. The place was deserted. The only sound was the soft lapping of the lake's waves, creating a rhythmic lullaby. Overhead, the sky was filled with stars, with the Milky Way clearly visible. I stripped down to my underwear and inhaled the crisp night air. The smell was earthy, damp soil, aquatic plants, and a hint of brine. Expecting the water to be cold, I waded in knee-deep first, the water lapping around my shins. A little shiver ran up my spine. Freezing, I muttered to myself. But in actuality, the invigorating chill was just what I had been looking forward to. There was just something alluring about a late-night swim. With the cool water surrounding me, I felt my movements echoing beneath the surface, the stars watching overhead. It felt like entering a different realm, distinct from the familiar dry land. Taking a deep breath, I dived into the rest of the swim. The water felt smooth against my skin, washing away my stress. For a while, I just floated on my back, looking at the stars above, the water gently rocking me like nature's very own cradle. Suddenly, I felt something beneath me. Initially, I dismissed it as my feet grazing some underwater plants. But then it happened again, an enormous draft, like something huge moving beneath me. The once comforting rocking grew choppy, followed by a series of waves that threatened to overturn me. The silence of the night was disrupted by what sounded like a huge splash, a hefty mass displacing water at an alarming rate. I squinted at the darkness, trying to get a fix on whatever was causing this. All of a sudden, something breached the surface of the water, causing a gigantic splash that sent me tumbling back into the water. I barely caught the vaguest silhouette of something. My mind raced to make sense of it, but all I could make out was a colossal, serpentine shadow, akin to the dragons you read about in fantasy novels. There was a strange smell too, beyond the brine, a foul, unnatural odor that was hard to stomach. One moment, I was peacefully swimming under the stars, and then everything changed. I frantically spun around, started swimming towards the shore with all the strength I could muster. The creature sent another violent wave, nearly disorienting me. I kicked harder, my blood pounding and cold fear gripping my gut. With the silhouette in my peripheral vision, I surged ahead, driven by adrenaline. I had no idea what that thing was, but one thing seemed clear to me. It was enormous. It churned the water, and each splash echoed like a thunderclap in the silent night. Before I knew it, I was coughing and sputtering in the shallows. I stumbled onto the shore, feeling my heart's pulse in my throat. I quickly dressed, my hands shaking and breath ragged. I risked a quick glance back at the water, half afraid of what I might see. The once tranquil black mirror of the lake was a turmoil of waves and eddies, but the silhouette was nowhere to be seen. In that moment, I felt the weight of my solitude. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with something terrifying in the lake. I didn't stick around to give that creature a chance to reappear. I left my things and took off, driven by adrenaline and pure, unfiltered fear. Later, under the safety of daylight, I went back for my belongings. I stared at the calm surface of the lake, now seemingly untouched, safe. Yet, under that tranquil surface, I couldn't help but picture a monster, lurking, waiting. A chill ran up my spine, a stark reminder of the previous night. It was a chill deeper than fear, a reminder of the unresolved mystery from my midnight swim. I've never returned to Lake Minchin for a night swim, but the allure of the mystery still beckons. Was it a rogue wave, an oversized eel, or a driftwood? Or was it the serpentine dragon beast my panicked mind painted it to be? Most of my friends have sensible explanations. But there's that oddball theorist who would tell you, Lake Minchin has its monster, a warning to all moonlit swimmers. Before you dive into a serene lake, you never know who or what might join you. This story takes place a couple years back, while I was on a road trip through the stark yet beautiful terrains of western Texas. I'd always been drawn to the idea of a solo road trip, a journey of self-discovery, really. I wanted to trade the concrete hustle of city life for a raw, untouched expanse of solitude, where the earth meets the sky at a distant horizon. That fascination can be quite a drug, you know? So, there I was, midway into my trip, enjoying the sense of isolation, the therapeutic hum of my car's engine muffled by a playlist of my favorite tunes. It was a typical day, filled with roadside diversions, camera clicks capturing unique rock formations, and the radiant colors of the setting sun. I was slowly sinking into the rhythm of the road. Wake up at the crack of dawn, drive until sunset, find a quiet spot to camp, and do it all over again the next day. One particular evening stands out. I remember pulling over, entranced by this mesmerizing desert sunset. Hues of pink, purple, and deep orange, elegantly draped over the sand and rock. And me, chasing fleeting moments through the lens of my camera. The beauty of Texas slowly imprinted onto my memory. That sunset acted as my perfect backdrop. Just as I was wrapping the day's shoot, something peculiar caught my eye up in the dusky sky. A lustrous object, glinting in the fading sunlight. At first, I thought it was a plane or maybe a drone. My curiosity piqued. I decided to train my camera on the airborne object. My viewfinder served as binoculars of sorts. As my lens came into focus, I realized this was not an ordinary object. It was entirely metallic, reflective, and hovering without any discernible propulsion. Odd as it was beautiful. I dismissed it as some uncharted military hardware. I've read the articles, you know. Sightings around desert stretches often get explained as military maneuvers. However, the isolation of the surrounding area still made me uneasy. I was worried turning away might make me vulnerable somehow, so I watched. I watched the object perform inexplicable aerial maneuvers. Its movements were nothing short of hypnotic, defying conventional aerodynamics. Sharp turns, hovering, and sudden accelerations. Maybe it was a drill of some kind. Why else would it have been flying in patterns like that? I sensed a hum, a strange mechanical noise that I can't quite explain. Figuring this was too unusual to leave uncaptured, I switched my camera back to video mode and hit the button to start recording just as the object began behaving erratically. Just as quickly as it had appeared, it started to descend rapidly in a free-fall manner. Then at the last second, surged forward in a blink, crashing somewhere in the distance with a brilliant flash of light that painted the desert night in its glow. Caught in a wave of anticipation, fear, and curiosity, I decided to head in the direction of the crash. Little did I know then, my adventure had only just begun. Back in my car, my heart was racing. The entire landscape was plunged into darkness after the brilliant flash. The silence was only broken by the faint hum of my car's engine as I navigated the undulating desert terrain. The crash site was a few miles to the north. I parked my car at a distance and grabbed my camera bag, flashlight, and some water. I was preparing myself for a trek into the unknown. It wasn't long before I was standing at the edge of a smoldering crater, staring slack-jawed at the wreckage of the strange object. The fallen object was only a few feet in diameter. Parts of it still glowed faintly in the dark. The eerie silence was periodically broken by soft humming noises that seemed to be originating from the wreckage itself. A ghostly glow reflected off of its metal frame. It seemed to have a few rotating lights attached to its base, fluctuating between blues, greens, and reds. With my camera, I started taking as many shots as possible of its contours, composition, and the charred ground around it. I was no expert, but the technology seemed way beyond any human ingenuity, almost alien-like. The sight was frightening and fascinating all at once. Out of nowhere, bright headlights flooded the area. I dropped my bag, shielding my eyes from the sudden harsh light, and spun around to find a convoy of black SUVs cutting through the desolate landscape towards me. Men in black tactical gear poured out of the vehicles. Their badges reflected the headlights of the SUVs. They warned me off the sight, their voices stern, demeanor unfriendly. In the flurry of the moment, I grabbed my camera bag and retreated hastily towards my car. My heart raced as I fumbled with my keys, the heavy presence of unwanted company anchoring me to reality. I turned on the ignition and peeled away from the scene, careful not to glance in my rearview mirror till I was a safe distance away. Safe from what, though? That's a question I still grapple with. The episode left me with a sense of profound unease that lingered long after I was distanced from the site of my encounter. The isolated nameless spots in the desert suddenly felt secretive and eerie, repositories of truths we humans aren't prepared for. The thought of finding peace and self-reflection out there now feels like a foolish idea. The memory of that night haunts me with a mixed sense of wonder and trepidation. Was I lucky to have witnessed something so extraordinary? Or was it just a hair's breadth escape from a potential threat? Did I come face to face with tangible proof of an extraterrestrial existence? Something beyond our own petty squabbles on this small planet? And who were those men in the SUVs? Government agents on a potential cover-up mission? I kept my video footage out of their reach, filing away my digital evidence and the chilling memory of that Texas desert encounter. The world continued in oblivious rhythm, none the wiser about what we may be sharing our universe with. And so, that's my story. Bizarre to the core, obscured by complex layers of uncertainty, clandestine operations, and extraterrestrial accidents. Thanks for letting me share. When I scored tickets to tour the Queen Mary, a retired ocean liner docked outside of Long Beach, I couldn't believe my luck. I didn't think my passion for all things nautical would lead to an encounter I'd never forget. It was a clear and sunny Tuesday, early autumn. The temperature held just a hint of winter, enough to warrant a cozy jacket, but not enough for me to ruin my hair with a tight-knit cap. The way the sun reflected off the Pacific with a diamond-like sparkle, you could tell it was going to be a memorable day. Stepping onto that grand old lady, named after Queen Mary of Tech, was like being magically transported into a bygone era. I had always been deeply fascinated by the sea, those great vessels that rode upon it, and the mysteries they carried within their steel bellies. Visiting the Queen Mary was a pilgrimage of sorts. Even in her permanent mooring, she was majestic, a titan harking back to an age of luxury liners, when crossing the Atlantic was an event more like a royal adventure than the commonplace journey it is today. Like any self-professed history nerd, I had done my homework before joining the tour. The Queen Mary wasn't just any ship after all. She was a legend. Built and launched in the 1930s, she spent 3 decades cutting through oceans at record speeds. She served as a cruise ship, a W-2 troop carrier, earning her the nickname the Gray Ghost, and then again as a cruise ship until she finally retired to a life of hosting tourists like myself in the sunny shores of Long Beach. Visiting her was like paying respects to a delectable relic of a mooted past. My tour of the ship started out normal enough, basking in the history of the colossal vessel. Every room teemed with stories from a lost era. The grand ballroom where passengers, dressed in gowns and tuxedos, danced the night away under the warm gleam of the elegant chandeliers. The promenade deck, still clad in polished wood, once offered wealthy travelers the dreamiest views of the immense ocean. The old steam room below deck, where the air was heavy with the scent of antiquity. While roaming around, tapping into the historical gold mine that was every nook and cranny of this ship, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was never alone. The whispering echoes of the past seemed to follow me, making the hair at the back of my neck prickle. A sense of unseen eyes observing me, ghostly murmurs in the cold corridors, the slight unease in the otherwise serene settings, the inexplicable chill in certain parts of the ship. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the night unfurled its blanket, the flickers of unease that had haunted me all day began to amplify. I couldn't keep explaining my feelings as the weight of history pressed down around me. This was something more. Alone in my cabin, which once hosted the luminaries of the world, the uncanny sense of being watched became overwhelming. I could feel a presence, could almost hear the soft creak of floorboards, the echo of hushed footsteps, as if someone, no, not someone, more like something was trying to get my attention. But the true encounter, the unspoken communication with that otherworldly presence, was still to come. The ship and its past would soon reveal itself to me in a way I hadn't imagined. Little did I know, I was about to delve beyond the superficial beauty and grandeur of the Queen Mary. I'd be facing the hidden secrets that the historical voyage held. That night, I was awoken by the chilling grasp of a cold spot in my cabin. Strangely, even though I'd left the heater on, it felt like I was standing outside in a harsh winter. It was certainly colder than California had any right to be. The room's temperature plunged and made my breath cloud up in front of my eyes. Moving towards the thermostat, I felt my foot knock against something. Swinging my flashlight around, I noticed that my suitcase, which I'd earlier stowed under the bed, was now smack in the middle of the room. Strange, but maybe I'd not tucked it away properly. Too tired to think it over, I pushed it back under the bed and attempted to get the heater working again. Nothing. Resigned, I crawled back into bed, wrapped myself tightly in the heavy blankets, and hoped sleep would find me again. It did until a soft creaking jarred me awake. It sounded like someone pacing slowly in the room. The floorboards groaned under some spectral weight. Suddenly, a strong aroma of old perfume, mixed with sea air, filled the room. It was almost enough to make me gag. I swung the beam of my flashlight around nervously, trying to locate the source. When the beam landed on the hallway leading to the tiny unused kitchenette, I saw it. A transparent figure, female, dressed in a 1930s evening gown, standing silently. Her face was oddly pale and distorted, and her eyes shimmered in the dim cabin light. The shine in her gaze wasn't unlike the reflection of the sun on the ocean waves. She wore a sad expression, as if mourning her long-lost past. Frozen with terror, I watched as she began drifting slowly towards me. As she came closer, the temperature in the room seemed to drop even further, making me shiver uncontrollably. Then, just as I was about to scream, she stopped. Turning around, she faced the wall and simply seeped into it, disappearing from sight. My heart was pounding in my chest as I spent a sleepless night wondering what had just happened. What could it have been, besides a ghost? Did I even believe in those kinds of things? Morning couldn't come soon enough. When the dawn finally peeked through the cabin's tiny window, I was out of the room and exploring the section of the wall the spectral lady had passed through. There, hidden behind a false panel, I discovered a stash of letters dating back to the 1930s. Most seemed to be love letters between a passenger and someone named Margaret, full of longing, passion, and promises of meeting again, which possibly never happened. I still don't know if what I saw was real or some dreamy manifestation. All I know is the scent of vintage perfume still lingers on those letters. Did I encounter the ghost of a lady who once loved and lost aboard the majestic Queen Mary? Or was it something else? The details in the past, I decided, were best left untouched. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. That, however, won't stop me from visiting her again. As frightening as my first encounter aboard the Queen Mary was, it hasn't made the ship any less fascinating. Every creaking corridor, every chilly breeze feels like more than just a glimpse at history. It feels like you're a part of it. This isn't the only weird tale I've got in my arsenal. I've seen a lot of strange things in my time as a plumber. Not all of those things can be explained. This is the story I want to tell right now, though. It's unique because it didn't happen in my backyard. It happened several states away, actually. That didn't make it any less terrifying. It happened about 3 years ago in the Ocala National Forest, right smack in the middle of Florida. Me and a few buddies headed down there. Marty, Ed, and little Jojo. He's not really little, standing a whole head and a half taller than me. But that's a story for another time. We decided to make a camping trip out of it. I enjoy my pipe wrenches and sinks, but when I get the chance to breathe in the open air and gaze up at the stars without neon signs obscuring the view, you bet I'm there. Camping, it's a whole other kind of plumbing if you ask me, where instead of unclogging pipes, you're unclogging your soul. Sounds cheesy, I know, but bear with me, eh? So, we're out there in the middle of nowhere, an island of tents and laughter in the ocean of trees, all drawn together by the glow of a crackling fire. Marty's working on a pot of chili, Ed's strumming away on his old guitar, while little Jojo and I are just sitting there, chewing the fat and sharing manly stories. You know how it is. Once our bellies were full and the ghost stories were told, none of which could compare to what happened next, we decided it was time to hit the hay. Jojo and Marty took the first shift for bear watch since Ed and I had driven the whole day. Bear watch is a thing, right? Anyway, I should have started this off by saying I ain't one to believe in the supernatural. To me, the world is pipes and valves. Knowable, understandable. You might think there ain't much difference between Ohio and Florida, besides the weather and the accents, but you'd be wrong. That night, I'm cozy within my sleeping bag. I'm away from my problems, looking at the insides of my eyelids, when I was suddenly assaulted by a foul stench. It was like burning rubber doused in raw sewage. I almost tasted it too. I sat up, half expecting to see Jojo's socks on fire or something. The explanation wasn't so simple. To make things creepier, it was unnaturally silent. The forest had completely hushed up. The usual chirping of the crickets, the light rustling of leaves, all gone. I peeked outside and found Marty and Jojo snoozing by the smoldering embers of our fire. Some bear watchers those two turned out to be. I was about to give them both a piece of my mind when I heard it. It was a low growl from somewhere off in the dark, a sound so deep and rumbling. It was as if the earth itself was groaning. Something unfamiliar twisted my gut listening to it, and I figured at once that it wasn't some regular animal making that sound. Now here's where my skills as a storyteller fail me. That growl was like a joke told in a language you can't speak. I heard thunder, but didn't see any clouds. An animal, but not exactly natural. The sound that echoed through my ears was full of, I'm not sure what exactly, but it felt like rage, if that makes any sense. Like it wasn't just growling, it was yelling about something. Yelling at me, maybe. I scrambled to my feet, my sleepy haze washing away. Heart pounding like a jackhammer, I grabbed my flashlight and felt the world become too still around me. Even Marty and Jojo's regular breathing seemed to fade into the backdrop of the stifling silence. And that's when I saw it. Glowing faintly in the dark were two deep red spots about a good 50 yards off into the tree line. I thought it might be the glare of some critter, but even that felt wrong. My instincts were screaming that whatever I was looking at, whatever was looking at me, wasn't your run-of-the-mill bear or mountain lion. I shined my flashlight towards the red spots, and they disappeared. Yet I didn't hear any animal scramble away. It was as if it just vanished. Maybe I was just seeing things? I'm not the kind of guy who gets scared easily, you see, and I figured my mind was playing tricks on me, trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, as it were. But then I heard it again, that god-forsaken growl, now accompanied by a low, chilling bark, echoing through the forest like the sound of a trumpet, announcing the apocalypse. I've been around dogs most of my life, having had several as pets, and having met countless more during my outings. Let me tell you, this was no dog. No, sir. It was as though the very souls of the damned themselves were barking in agony. I mean, whose blood wouldn't run cold hearing a sound like that? And I know how crazy that all sounds. Too biblical, I know. But it's what I felt in the moment. Doesn't get any truer than what you feel, right? Now, the chill running down my spine wasn't from the cold, I'll tell you that much. Even in the dim moonlight, I could make out the towering figure moving in the dark. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Big as a horse and more terrifying than one of Jojo's yarns. The weak beam of my flashlight practically bounced off its fur, a black so deep it seemed to swallow up the light. And then them eyes, demonic and fiery, reflected back a menacing red that seemed to bore right through me. I sprung into action, tossing my flashlight towards Marty and Jojo, and that was enough to rouse them. Man, you should have seen the looks on their faces when they saw the creature. Jojo looked like he'd seen a ghost, and even old Marty looked like he was about to lose his wits. They covered their noses and mouths to shield themselves from the reek coming off that creature. Like the breath of the underworld, it smelt like. It covered you like a damp blanket. Beads of fear formed on everyone's brow. That smell alone was enough to send us packing. I yelled at the beast, trying to scare it off while Marty and Jojo started hastily packing our gear. To our utter shock, the creature seemed unfazed. The usual tricks of waving a burning stick or yelling did nothing. I think it even sneered at us, if you can believe it. Odd, I know, but we didn't stick around to investigate. In minutes, we were barreling through the forest, leaving behind a wrecked campsite and probably a smug monstrosity. I kept looking back, half expecting to see the hell beast chasing us, but all I got was the faint glow of its eyes, like the taillights of a car disappearing in the night. That was some time ago now, and while we still love camping, we've yet to return to the Ocala National Forest. I suppose we're a bit cautious, you know. Whatever's ruptured out in those woods, a monster's come through the opening, and none of us are equipped to patch it up. That tale gave the boys here in Ohio a royal laugh when I told them about it. I do think we encountered a real hellhound that night. It's become part of our camping legend now. The Hellhound of Ocala scares more people round the campfire than any movie ever could. So, as I wrap up this long-winded account, I hope you and your listeners can make sense of what we experienced. All I got from that spooky encounter was a tale to tell, and the surefire knowledge that there's more out there in the world than I could ever fix with a pipe wrench. I might as well set the scene, right? It won't feel the same if you don't have the context. It was Mardi Gras, down in the beating heart of New Orleans. As big as life, as wild as ever. The city was alive with energy, dancing pulses of sound and color, of joy and pumped-up excitement. Being the curious cat I am, I decided to stray from the pounding heart of Bourbon Street, just for a moment, and found myself wandering down an unfamiliar alley. You bet I was taken in by the spectacle, but there's something about unfamiliarity that truly draws me in. The mystery of the unexplored guides your boots while your head's still caught up in the drum beats and laughter, you know? God, that alley was a different world. Away from the jazz-infused chaos, it was quieter than it should have been for Mardi Gras, more mysterious. There, nestled within the vibrant and murky shades of the narrow passage, was a small voodoo shop. The building was as seasoned as old-time jazz itself. I have always had an interest in the eccentric, the intriguing. This shop was the quintessence of those, filled with a potent sense of the otherworldly, yet bewitching energy. I'm sure it was only there to lure in tourists like myself, but how could I say no? Painted pots of every color spilled from its doorway. Feathered masks and strands of beads overlooked that mess of peculiar jars. Yet within the chaos of Mardi Gras, the building stood almost forgotten. I was a fish on a hook. I stepped inside and the bell above the door rattled a discordant welcome. The air was thick with fragrant incense that curled and eddied in waves. The odor was pungent enough to make me miss the cool outdoor air. The store was crammed with shelves full of eccentric curiosities. Rough-hewn wooden masks, strange herbs, crystals, and the like. But among all those curios, this talisman caught my eye. It was an odd little thing, made of bone, I think, but carved with intricate detail. Almost felt like it was humming in my hand, vibrating with an energy I couldn't quite comprehend. But I played it off as excitement, carnival buzz, shaking the weirdness out of my mind. The owner, an old woman with unreadable eyes, hands as craggy as the city streets, gave me a long, piercing look when I placed it on the counter. She made me feel like prey under a hawk's gaze, chilled me more than the alleyway ever could. She mumbled a few words, a warning maybe, skeletal hand waving over the talisman, cryptic advice about respect and care. Me? I just laughed it off. It was Mardi Gras after all, the time of laughter and wild abandon. I paid her, ducked back out into the alleyway, and rejoined the chaos with my strange new trinket. The revelry seemed only to heighten after that, but I couldn't shake off an odd sensation, like I was being watched. A hot, piercing gaze that slipped through the dense crowd and found me. Peculiar occurrences followed. Footsteps rushed behind me, but no one passed me by. The crowd seemed to writhe and slither, like the bodies of each partygoer had combined into a single serpent. I wrote those illusory beats off as tricks of the mind, excess alcohol, or the city's bizarre charm. One night while I lay down in my hotel room, trying to shake off the buzz of the festival, something changed. It started with a distinct smell, burnt, a sort of brimstone odor mixed with the disgusting hint of charred flesh. The air turned dense, and I could hear this weird, faint, and cryptic whisper, like a conversation between many voices, but in a language unknown to me. Suddenly, my room was filled with a blinding light. It was instantaneous, going from normal to overwhelming brightness. And there, close to the ceiling, hovered a shadow, an entity. Whatever it was, it terrified me. No substantial form to it, just a massive, nebulous darkness, constantly changing between massive, towering heights and small, impish statures. It was a whirl of darkness, eyes glowing a sickly, ominous yellow. The whispering voices gained volume, turned into the most dreadful laugh I have ever heard. It was like a twisted symphony, resounding from all corners of the space. Despite how hot I was frozen. My sense of dread grew with each passing second. I tried to escape, but it was as if an invisible force bound me to the mattress. That was the moment I noticed the talisman. It was pulsating, a forceful, almost angry rhythm. It bathed the room in a ghastly red glow. From the core of my being, I sensed that the talisman was tied to whatever above me. Driven by sheer desperation, and with every fiber of my being screaming, I picked up the talisman and ran. I pushed past the thronging crowd. My heart was pounding like a drum. How did I manage to get out of bed when I'd felt so clearly trapped before? Was that dark mass behind me somewhere, following? I retraced my steps from earlier. The eerie quiet of that solitary alleyway remained a sharp contrast to the riotous festival around me. I flung open the shop's door, almost falling over in my haste. The old woman raised her eyes. She looked from my face to the talisman and sighed, as if expecting this. Wordlessly, she reached over and took the trinket from my trembling hands, before placing it back to its original spot. I instantly felt better. The feeling of being observed, that creepy chill running down my spine, gone. Just like that. After that experience, I walked back into the sea of revelers as if in a haze. The once enticing craziness of Mardi Gras had dulled, eclipsed by overwhelming relief and the echoes of my fear. Now? Well, whenever I look back at that episode in lively New Orleans, I swear I can still smell the faint scent of brimstone mixed with the ripe carnival air. I believe now that what I encountered wasn't just my mind at play or the carnival high. I faced something much more sinister, something darker, that lay in the heart of the beautiful chaos we call Mardi Gras. Either way, that incident opened my eyes to the unseen. It only took one trip to Mardi Gras for me to recognize the dangers we can run into while chasing our own revelry. I think I'll go back next year, but I think I've had my fill of alleyways. I couldn't escape the stories. You know, working as a park ranger in the Pine Barrens, all anyone wanted to talk about was mysteries, strange happenings and tall tales, sprouted between the trees like vines. I always dismissed them. I was never the superstitious type. I didn't have room in my life for exaggerations. That was, of course, until my own encounter. It was my third year in the area. I had made a name for myself as the young go-getter. There wasn't a route that I wouldn't walk. I'd work any hour and accept any calls. With that in mind, I guess I always figured that if something did happen, it would happen at an odd time or while I was doing something extraordinary. That wasn't the case. I was out on a routine patrol, making my way through the brush and the cedar, when I heard a strange noise coming from the direction of a nearby clearing. I'd come through there many times, never heard anything like this though. It was a low, guttural growl, and it sent shivers down my spine. If it wasn't for the hair standing upright on my neck, I would have described it as bear-like. Bears never made me feel like this though. They never made me feel so vulnerable, so inherently afraid, like I'd been pushed to the edge of a cliff, and it was time to look down and jump. You ever felt fear like that? I instinctively reached for my radio, preparing to call for backup, but then I saw it. The world strangely seemed to slip away. I was in shock, I guess. My brain was ready to process what my eyes were seeing. My skeptic's mind was at a disadvantage here. The creature was massive, easily standing over 7 feet tall. Upright, too. It stood like a man, minus its hunched shoulders and low-hanging arms. Its shaggy hair was matted and dry, and its eyes were dark and intense. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, neither of us moving. Then the creature let out a roar that shook the trees and reminded me that I was in trouble. I tried the radio for help. The signal was unusually weak and barely audible. Could the creature have caused that? It was clear that I was on my own, and I braced myself for the worst. Then the beast reached for something. I tried to turn, to run, and take cover. I barely managed to duck my head behind the trunk of a tree before a large stone sailed past me. It would have crushed me if I hadn't moved. What would I have done then? I would have melted into the Pine Barrens, and my story would have never been told. I guess that's where the fascination comes from, right? The need to share this tale. It easily could have been buried out there in the mud. I risked a peek around the curve of the tree. I needed to know where it was and what it was doing. Could I hope to outrun or outclimb it? I thumbed the bear spray on my hip. I'd had to use it if the creature was coming closer. I'd have to pray that the eye-watering scent would be enough to save my life. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature seemed to lose interest. It hesitated, as if unsure of what to do next, before disappearing back into the woods. Was it trying to chase me off? Was it mad that I had interrupted something? Or was that moment when our eyes met that forgettable for the creature? Was I that insignificant? That thing had shifted my entire reality and then just turned its back on me. I was left standing there, stunned and shaken by what I had just seen. I knew that I had encountered something that was beyond my understanding, something that defied all of my training and experience. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, trying to make sense of what I had seen. But the truth was that I couldn't explain it. All I knew is that there was something out there in the Pine Barrens that was unlike anything I had ever encountered before. It took me days just to talk about it. My peers scoffed at first. I think because of my unusual treatment of their own personal encounters. I'd always been the one laughing, looking down on them, and telling them that the shadows had tricked their minds. When they realized that I was serious, when they saw the trembling in my hands, their tones changed. They warned me not to take it up the chain of command. I'm not sure why. I listened to them too. I'm not sure what kind of trouble I would have got in, but I wanted to keep my job. Monster or no monster, my position gave me purpose. If I stopped trekking through those woods every day, I'm not sure who I'd be. I'd be something less, that's for sure. Besides, I wouldn't want this story to end with the creature winning. As my patrols continued, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. It's as if the Pine Barrens know that I have learned their secret. The trees themselves want to keep me in line. If the beast is still out there, waiting for its next chance to disrupt my life, it's my responsibility to be ready for it. Next time, I won't freeze. I won't let the fear paralyze me. I might not be able to scare it in the same way that it scared me, but I have a duty to protect the people who visit the park. I keep my eyes and my ears open. I can't say for sure that I'm ready, but nowadays, I sure listen to every strange story to come out of these woods. It was strange, the things that happened then. I honestly felt like I was in a movie or something. It was unbelievable. It was truly unbelievable. I was working in law enforcement and had been getting a ton of calls flooding in. Kids were acting out. There was a ton of loitering and vandalism. It was really getting out of control. Many people in the town had started blaming things like social media. Things like TikTok, for example, had caused kids to dare each other, to connect their smartphones to Bluetooth devices in stores while playing inappropriate music and videos. Stuff like that. It was really creating a tidal wave of concern for parents. Most of the activity was considered harmless, but I think most parents felt that this could lead to worse behavior down the road. If kids started playing with the idea of being rambunctious and rebellious, it could push them to do something crazier. They were pushing the envelope, I guess you could say. So we were having a little trouble with pranksters. It really was an epidemic. Around that time, I had been called out for lots of different things. Kids were sneaking out at night, so parents were reporting them as runaways. Some kids were vandalizing parked vehicles. It seemed like the normal prank stuff from my day, the egging and the TPing pranks, were no longer edgy enough. Do you know what I mean? That's the whole pushing the envelope thing. I do remember having a town meeting. It was really exhausting. Parents wanted answers, but we, law enforcement, didn't really have any answers. We couldn't arrest them for silly things. We could give them tickets for really inappropriate behavior, but let's be honest, we'd really be giving their parents tickets. So what would that do to help? The kids certainly wouldn't learn their lesson this way, not unless parents enforced some type of rules. So that's what everyone discussed at the town meeting, but nothing really seemed like a solution. A couple of days after the town meeting, my partner and I were called to an elderly woman's home. She claimed that some kids were on her property and refused to leave. When we arrived, we didn't see any kids. I wouldn't doubt it if our car had scared them off. But we went into the woman's home to get a report of what happened and stayed for a bit to make sure the kids wouldn't come back. She explained that she had heard some voices on the side of her home near her bathroom window. She didn't like the idea that someone was snooping around her home, especially by her bathroom. So she went out onto her porch. The kids were off to her left. She said she rudely asked them to get off her lawn. She was very honest about this fact. She said that with all the commotion in town, she didn't trust the kids. I couldn't really blame her, but the kids asked if they could come inside her house. The woman refused to allow them entry. She stated that she could call their parents instead. The kids seemed to have gotten upset. The woman noticed a change in their behavior, so she threatened to call the police, and certainly stayed true to her word. I asked how many kids and how old. She reported that there were 3 kids who all ranged from the ages 10 to 16. I asked if she had ever seen them before. She explained that she hadn't. I asked what they were wearing, and all she could tell me is that they were wearing dark sweatshirts with their hoods up. She said she couldn't really see them too well. She couldn't really tell if they were male or female. She said she tried to stay as far away from them as she could. After about an hour, we thanked her for her time, and we left. Several days after that, I was off duty. I had gone to the gym, and after, I needed to run to the grocery store to pick up a few things. When I finished up, it was around 8:30 p.m. I had just loaded up my car when I heard some movements behind me. I turned around. I noticed some kids approaching the convenience store. I unlocked my car door and hopped inside. At this point, I'm checking my phone, and I notice the kids are getting closer to my car. I don't pay too much attention. I figured they were going to walk past the store instead of going inside. They didn't go into the store. I wasn't surprised. They didn't walk past it either. Instead, they're standing by my car door. I didn't want to give them attention. I figured that's what they wanted. But they just stood there. Finally, I asked, "Can I help you with something? Do you need help?" One of the kids responded that they needed a ride home. I assured them that I could call their parents to come get them. They refused. I started to get a little frustrated. I wasn't going to drive them home. It wouldn't be appropriate. So I told them I wouldn't be able to help them if I couldn't call their parents. It was really odd. Their behaviors seemed to change. And that's when I noticed that there were 3 of them, all with dark sweatshirts, all with their hoods up. They talked very persuasively, a little too sophisticated for their ages, which seemed to range from about 10 to 16. And that's when I realized that these must have been the same kids the old woman had reported. At this point, I'm feeling a bit like they know who I am, like they knew I was the officer who took the call. So I figured they were trying to prank or intimidate me. They didn't really need help. They wanted to ruffle my feathers. And then I noticed their eyes. Their eyes were completely black and void of any expression. I was so scared. So I drove away, and they vanished without a trace. I own a shop. I probably shouldn't say what kind of shop or where it's located. I've lived here all my life, and I've always dreamed of owning my own shop. My father always told me I didn't have what it took to run my own business. So, after 5 years of running my own shop successfully, I now tell my son that he can do anything he puts his mind to. Every day on my way to work, I would pass this gated dirt road, and I always wondered what was down there. I figured it was a huge farm or huge mansion or something like that. It kind of drove me crazy thinking and wondering about it. Then one day, my son and I were driving to the store when we passed the gate. I told them about how I was curious to know what was down that road. He suggested that we fly his new drone over the property and see what we can figure out. A couple of days later, we pulled over to the side of the road, and he launched his drone up into the air. We got back into the truck, and I watched as he maneuvered the drone further and further down the dirt road. I bet that it was a mansion, and he bet that it was more of just a regular house, and we made a little game out of it. We were both shocked when he flew over a huge facility with a large fence surrounding it. And then we noticed several black vans in the parking lot. I was blown away. It was the last thing we were expecting to see. He got nervous and was going to fly the drone back, but I told him to fly it down to the front door to investigate what the building could be. When the drone got to the front door, the windows were all blacked out, and there was no indication of what the purpose of the building was. I told him to fly around the building, and it was more of the same. Completely blackout windows, and nothing to give any sort of indication of what was going on inside. Then suddenly, a man in a suit ran out the door and aimed a firearm at the drone. I yelled for my son to fly it back, but then the feed cut off. My son was freaked out and wanted to get out of there. but I was furious that the man shot the drone down. It had been a Christmas present for my son, and it cost me a nice chunk of change. I wasn't about to let that money go to waste. I told my son to wait in the truck, and I headed over to the gate. He pleaded with me not to go, but I was really angry. I climbed up and jumped over the fence and headed down the dirt road. I didn't have a plan, and I wasn't exactly sure of what I was going to do, but I was upset and was running down the dirt road toward the facility. When I got to the end of the dirt road, I realized that this end had a huge electric fence with barbed wire at the top. There was no way I could climb over it. So I made my way back down the road, climbed over the gate, and got back into the car. I searched online for an address and phone numbers so I could call the number and get my son's drone back. But there was nothing that I could find about the building anywhere online. Every day I would pass by that dirt road, I would get more and more suspicious. I'd see black vans with blacked out windows go through the gate and leave. It was driving me nuts, and I had to figure out what was going on inside that building. I'm not proud of this, but I had just found out that my ex-wife had an affair with my neighbor while we were married. So I got sloppy drunk. My son begged me not to drive, but I took my license plates off, hopped in my truck, and sped over to the facility. I was in a dark place, but I was going to figure out what was going on in that building once and for all. I busted through the gate and sped down the dirt road, blasting Lynyrd Skynyrd on my truck speakers. The guitar solo of Freebird was blaring, and I floored it toward the huge fence entrance. I smashed through the fence and went full speed toward the entrance of the building with the intention of smashing through the doors. I saw the doors swing open, and a man in a suit was standing in the doorway. A wave of clarity hit me, and I realized that this might result in me killing myself or killing someone else, and I might never see my son again. I slammed on the brakes and threw the truck in reverse. I took off out of there as fast as I could, and I heard gunshots firing at me on my way out. I managed to make it home, and I pulled my truck into my garage and got some curtains to put up over the garage windows. I had to borrow my son's car to take to work, and every night for a month, I slowly but surely repaired the damage to my truck. Eventually, I got it looking perfect again, but I was still too paranoid to drive it around. I had to take a different road to work every day and would completely avoid that building as much as I could. One night, my son told me that he wanted to live with his mom, and it was more than I could bear. I got really drunk again and took off toward the facility. I had the same plan again and was blasting music, but to my amazement, the gate hadn't been repaired and was wide open. I took off down toward the fence, only to realize that the gate wasn't repaired either. I got suspicious at this point, as all the lights were off, and I couldn't see the building, which was usually completely illuminated. I slowed down and turned on my high beams, and discovered that the building had been completely torn down. There were no vehicles in the parking lot, and the building was just a pile of rubble. I was in complete shock. I went back home, took some time off to go to rehab, got off the booze, and am now happy to say that my son and I have healed our relationship and see each other regularly. My life is much less eventful nowadays, but I often think about that building. Is it possible that I made a difference? Is it possible that there really was something sinister going on in that building, and my actions brought it to light? There's still, to this day, no information to be found about that location at all. All I know, I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to be off alcohol. I'm grateful to have a relationship with my son again. And I'm grateful I didn't lose my shop due to my actions. I still often wonder what was going on in that building though. And why was it torn down so shortly after I busted through the fence? I'm a recovering alcoholic. I used to be an absolute animal. But about 5 years ago, I moved to a small town in Kansas, got a good job, and managed to create a nice, simple life for myself. I hadn't had a drink in 3 years, and I was really proud of myself for being able to turn my life around. It's not an easy thing to do, and I still struggle with my addiction every day. One day, I was walking home from work, as I often do, when I saw a strange figure up ahead. I thought it was just a weird person at first, but the closer I got, the more unnerving the reality of the situation was. Standing in front of me was a man in a suit with a lizard's head. It had these awful red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. I figured it had to be a man in a costume, but even from a distance, I was seriously freaking out. My fight or flight kicked in, and my heart started pounding. I didn't know if this guy was going to rob me, or fight me, or what. Then, as soon as he looked at me, he disappeared around the corner of the building. I ran over to see what he was up to, but he was nowhere to be found. I absolutely panicked, and I took off from there. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept trying to tell myself someone was just playing some kind of joke on me, but its freaky eyes are burned into my memory forever. The next day, I called my sponsor at the time and told him I was really freaking out and was desperately trying not to drink. When he asked me what was going on, I told him I saw a lizard man and I was in fear for my life. My sponsor thought that I was on a bender and told me to get help immediately. The more I pleaded with him, the crazier he thought I was, and it was just helpless to try and convince him otherwise. I went back to the spot where I'd seen the lizard man and looked all around the building, but didn't find anything out of the ordinary. I asked some of the shop owners if they saw anything strange there lately, and they all said they didn't see anything out of the ordinary. When I asked about the lizard man, people just assumed that I was a nut job. One store clerk kicked me out of the store just for asking. This was when I began to suspect that the lizard man was this store owner. Could it be that the lizard man let his charade of being a normal person down at just the right time? Could it be that I was onto him? After that, I started seeing lizard people everywhere. At the grocery store, walking down the street, driving in cars. I mean, everywhere. I started seeing them walking around my neighborhood and hovering around my house. It was almost like they were watching my every move. I tried to talk to some of my friends about it, but they thought I had a relapse and encouraged me to go get some help. My world was caving in. Everywhere I turned, there was no help in sight. The lizard men were ruining my freaking life. As time went on, I became more and more obsessed with the idea that these creatures were running the world. I started to see connections between crimes, strange events, and the lizard people. It was like I was uncovering some kind of conspiracy. My mind was constantly racing. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on work. Hell, was I working for lizard men? My mind was consumed by the idea that these creatures were watching me, that they knew everything I was doing, and they were responsible for the entire world as we know it. I spent countless hours researching lizard people, government cover-ups and conspiracies, other accounts of people who had seen the lizard people. I read every article and watched every video I could find. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a video about reptilian shapeshifters, then everything clicked for me. According to the video, these creatures had been around for centuries, and they were controlling the world from behind the scenes. They had infiltrated every level of government and were manipulating the masses. Finally, it all made sense. The Kennedy assassination, Area 51, the mind control lab in Alaska, alien abductions. The government has provided closure on none of these things. And why? Because they don't want us to know the truth, that we are being overrun by reptilian shapeshifters. Now, I'm an absolute recluse, spending most of my time in my basement, researching everything I can about these lizard people. Look it up, people. It's amazing how many people have seen them with their own eyes. Celebrities, politicians, activists, billionaires. I don't know the exact percentage, but an alarming fraction of them are reptilian shapeshifters. I was blind before I saw it with my own two eyes. I used to think that all conspiracy theories were nonsense. I mean, when you first hear this stuff, who in their right mind would believe that there are lizard people running the world? But after my own experience, I can't deny the reality. A veil has been lifted, and now I can see things that I never noticed before. I'm constantly on high alert, watching for any signs of the reptilian shapeshifters. I needed a change, so I moved down to Texas. I gotta say, that was the best decision of my life. But one of my first nights I was down here, something happened to me that changed me. There was this local bar that caught my eye, and I wanted to shake off the stress of moving and the trauma that I was moving away from. Shortly after I sat down and got myself a drink, this friendly man in a very expensive wine red suit sat down next to me. Now, being a blue-collar man myself, I usually don't get along with people that take themselves so seriously. But right off the bat, I couldn't help but notice he was one of the most charismatic and charming individuals I ever had the pleasure of talking to. We had quite a few drinks, and I was telling him about all the hardships I had dealt with that caused me to move down here. And I was amazed that one person was able to get me to open up so wholly and so quickly. I'm usually quite reserved. It was then that I realized that something might be off about this situation. Was he trying to rob me? Was he trying to distract me? Was he trying to have his way with me? But every time I got suspicious, he'd say something that would make me laugh and light up. And at that time, nobody could make me do either of those things. It was bizarre. I didn't think too much about it at first, but the conversation with this man got deeper and deeper. He asked me if I believed in souls and energy, and God, and all that stuff. Then he asked me if I believed in hell, and then he asked me if I would exchange part of myself for great wealth, power, and success. I said that I think every man does that to some extent, and that we probably wouldn't have jobs if we didn't have to do that. Then he asked me if I would exchange part of myself to fulfill all my deepest desires. I thought about it for a while and said, maybe. He asked me if I would give part of myself for forbidden knowledge and experiences that I would never have otherwise. Then it took a weird turn. The man's whole demeanor changed, and he looked at me intensely in the eyes, as if he couldn't contain his excitement any longer. He asked me what I would give in return if he could take the pain that I was running from, feeling like a fool for telling a stranger my deepest, darkest secret. I went to leave, and he stood up in front of the door. He looked completely different now. Then he asked me if I would sell my soul to prevent my loved ones from being hurt. Emotions were running hot, and I had a lot to drink, so this question prompted me to swing at him. To my astonishment, my fist went right through him, and I punched the brick wall by the door so hard I broke my hand. But next thing I know, the barkeep is throwing me out of the bar and threatening to call the cops. My hand is a broken mess, and the man I was talking to was nowhere to be found. I know what you're thinking. You had a lot to drink. You got into a bar fight. Your memory is a hazy mess, and the man was a result of the drunken hallucination. Let me just say this. The experience shook me so badly that I, a complete non-believer in the supernatural, now go to church every Sunday, read my Bible every day, and pray for protection and guidance every day. I know that the man was a demon trying to take my soul. He knew I was weak. He knew I was vulnerable. It was the lowest point I had ever been at in my entire life. Let me tell you, this is when he comes. Not when you're on top of the world. Not when you're doing good. Not when you're doing the right thing. He comes to you in a moment of weakness. Would I have sold my soul to the devil that night? Perhaps, if he had been more patient and asked me in a better way. My answer would have been yes. This thought keeps me up at night, and I can still see him standing by the door. No longer the nice man at the bar. His eyes black, his skin gray. It was no hallucination. It was the most real thing I had ever experienced. It made me realize we are but chess pieces in the battle of good versus evil. Free will is a gift, but total free will is an illusion. It was a horrifying experience, but I learned a lot from it. I realized how vulnerable we all are and how easily we can be deceived. The devil at the bar was so convincing, so charismatic, and I was so close to falling for his tricks. It's a sobering thought to know that there are beings out there who want nothing more than to deceive and destroy the good in us. I know that Satan and his demons are real, but I also know that God is more powerful than any of them. I encourage everyone I meet to get in touch with the good within and to reach out to God. Without him, this existence is flimsy and abysmal. I have no idea what the future holds, but I know that I'm better equipped to face whatever comes my way. My encounter with the demon taught me that there is more to this world than we can see with our eyes. It's up to us to be vigilant and to protect ourselves from the darkness that is always lurking just beneath the surface. I moved to Florida a few years ago for work. I love it here and don't miss the cold at all. The heat can be pretty intense though. As far as outdoor exploration goes, there are all kinds of things to see in Florida, and I'm always on the hunt for a good hiking trail. I was on one of my hikes when I saw something moving in the distance. At first, I thought it was a crazed lunatic in a ghillie suit, maybe a hunter. But as it got closer, I realized it wasn't a person at all. I know it sounds crazy, but man, this was something otherworldly. It was like something you would see in Star Wars. It kind of looked like Cousin It from the Addams Family, but it was green and had glowing red eyes. It was completely covered in green foliage, which hung all the way down to the ground. It was one of those moments where you keep blinking to make sure if you're actually seeing what you're seeing. I figured my mind had to be playing tricks on me, but there it was, clear as day. Then all of a sudden, it just stopped, and it stared right at me. Its eyes seemed to bore into my very soul, and I started panicking, man. Every muscle in my body was tense as I tried to figure out what the creature was going to do next. I couldn't move, couldn't take my eyes off of it, and I knew that any sudden movement on my part could provoke it into action. The silence was deafening, and I could hear my own breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Time seemed to stand still as I stood there, frozen in fear, with the Moss Man only a short distance away. We both stood there for what felt like a freaking eternity, and my heart was pounding. In that moment, everything happened so fast. The Moss Man, who had been eerily still just seconds before, suddenly charged full speed right at me. It ran like nothing I had ever seen before. My instincts kicked in, and I took off as fast as I could. I could hear that thing's heavy footsteps chasing after me, and its ragged breaths were deep and guttural, like a freaking demon. I ran as fast and as long as I possibly could, and when I finally stopped to catch my breath, the thing was nowhere to be found. I didn't tell anyone about my encounters at first, but I guess I was acting strangely, and my buddy took me out for drinks to cheer me up. He asked me what was wrong, and I spilled the beans for what must have been an hour. Of course, he laughed and thought I had lost my mind. But after I told him how close I came to dying, he finally believed me. He told me we had to go back and take care of the thing, but I told him I never wanted to go back there again. That's when he said it might have been a Bigfoot. And that's when reality hit me. We were dealing with something truly paranormal. He spent the night at my place that night, and we spent the rest of the night researching paranormal encounters in the area, trying to find any information that might shed light on what I had seen. As we delved deeper, we came across a phenomenon that had been reported in the area called the Moss Man. It was described as a humanoid figure covered in moss and leaves that had been sighted by lots of different people over the years. We were both amazed and horrified at what we were reading, but it gave me some more comfort to know that I wasn't the only one who had seen something like this. I also don't think my friend fully believed me until our research, and that was quite validating for me. I figured this would give me some closure, but honestly, my mental health got worse and worse, and I couldn't stop thinking about the Moss Man. I couldn't sleep and would wake up at night reading and watching videos about the Moss Man. I became absolutely obsessed, and it changed me forever. The years passed, and things returned to normal slowly, but surely. But I was never the same after that. They say that ignorance is bliss, and I can attest to the truth of that. I often think about how simple and happy my life was before my encounter with the Moss Man. The encounter with the Moss Man changed me in ways I could have never imagined. Before that night, I had a simplistic and naive view of the world. I believed that everything could be explained and that there was a rational explanation for every mystery. But after coming face to face with the unknown, I now know that there are forces at work that we cannot comprehend. It has made me question everything I thought I knew about life, God, and the universe. It's hard to feel safe in a world where things like the Moss Man can exist. It's made me realize that there is so much more out there that we don't understand, so much that is beyond our comprehension. It's a humbling experience, and it's made me appreciate the simple things in life even more. I am more cautious now, more aware of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, but at the same time, I'm also more open-minded and curious. I'm constantly seeking out new knowledge and trying to understand the mysteries of the world around me. The encounter with the Moss Man may have changed me, but it's also given me a new perspective on life and the world we live in. I don't know, man. Everything is fair game now. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, aliens, you name it. Before this, I thought all of that stuff was a bunch of nonsense. But all of that stuff could exist, and all I know is, I know nothing about the universe that I live in. I've been a trooper with the Highway Patrol in the great state of Texas for 12 years, and I can tell you, I've seen some things. But this thing that I'm telling you about, it's something I haven't dared to tell anyone. Not even my commanding officer. Now, our traffic, well, it's not exactly New York level, but it can get bad in the Metroplex. A lot of our highways are like arteries, leading out from the central heart of the major cities. They lead out into a whole lot of nothing, and a lot of my time is taken up with patrolling that nothing. Breakdowns can and do happen in rural areas, and some places are far enough out that cell reception can be downright impossible. And while a car's inoperable on the side of the road, all sorts of things can happen. We're talking running into a human trafficker or drug smuggling, critter trouble, just a normal day in the life, if you're me. But the normal stuff isn't why I'm telling you this. The weird stuff is. There are always things that happen in the middle of nowhere that just plain don't make much sense. Things like a strange reflective light from out in the dark hills that gives you the willies for a minute. It always turns out to be coyotes or a deer. Or when you come up on what looks like an abandoned car, but the driver's just pulled over to sleep. Not that it matters, because honestly, there's not much difference between a sleeping person and a fresh body for a minute under the beam of your flashlight. These are all things that are normal in the line of duty, but given the circumstances, they still feel uncanny. Every time, just that split second, your heart always thumps and you wonder, what is that? I wondered that a lot one night. My patrol route normally takes me on the highways between DFW and San Angelo in the west part of the state. On this night, dispatch had gotten a call for a car that had gone off the road, so I was on alert for a stranded motorist. Stranded car calls are common, and I always play the game of I wonder what the problem is this time when I get one. Could have been any one of a handful of reasons for the trouble. The most usual one is road debris puncturing a tire. Most people can change a flat, but sometimes their spare was flat too, or so old that it couldn't be used, or the kind of car trouble that needs a mechanic. Who knew? Driving that lonely stretch of road, you see a lot of wide open sky and not much else. I remember my headlights punching through the dark, the chatter on the radio background noise that one part of my brain paid attention to while I was focusing on looking for the stranded car. I found it about halfway to nowhere, off on the shoulder. At first glance, it didn't seem too bad. I could tell by the long skid marks that they had slammed on the brakes for some reason, but I couldn't immediately see anything that would make that necessary. Of course, there could have been an animal crossing the road, but I didn't see any blood on the asphalts or any damage to the car. I parked my cruiser about 3 car lengths behind the stranded truck, lights on, and strobing that blue and red. That's either comforting or intimidating, depending on who you ask and what you're pulling them over for. I had my flashlight on and my hand on my weapon, just in case. As I approached the car, I could see a male, approximately 35 to 40 years old, bearded, wearing a gimme hat and glasses. He was sitting in his seat, hands clearly visible on the steering wheel, which I appreciated, even though this wasn't a traffic stop. I waited until he clearly saw who I was and the badge before I tapped on the glass with the rim of my flashlight. And that's when I got a weird feeling. This guy was clearly a local boy, big and strong, and not a youngster with too much piss and vinegar in him for his own good. He looked freaked out, eyes big and a face that was pale and shiny with sweat. What in the world was going on? When you're a trooper, one of the first things you do is make sure that what you think you're dealing with is actually what you're dealing with. And from how nervous this guy looked, I think I was justified in wondering if this was a setup and there was someone waiting out in the dark to jump me, none of which made my hand move from my weapon, I promise you. I signaled him to hold on with one finger and took a couple of steps away from the truck and back toward my patrol vehicle, sweeping the surrounding area with my flashlight. Tactical mag lights are powerful, but I didn't see anything weird in the scrub either side of the road. All right then, I stepped back to the driver's side and tapped on the glass again. He rolled down the window, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Did you see it?" Not what I was expecting, sure, and I had to tell him no, I hadn't. I didn't ask what made him run off the road. He told me that a blue car had come roaring out of nowhere, going at least 90, and hadn't taken advantage of the empty road to go around him. It had stayed right on his bumper. The lights had been so bright that he had swerved off to the dirt shoulder to get away from it and skidded out. That was odd, the way the truck was sitting. I should have seen the skid in the dirt, and it should have been stopped oddly, but it wasn't. That weird feeling came back as I listened to his story, so I asked again if that was the whole thing. It wasn't. He said he'd gotten back on the road once the other driver had gone ahead. His ranch was about an hour away from where he'd originally stopped, which wasn't here. He had driven another 10 miles before he saw headlights coming up behind him again. They came up right behind him, like right on his tail, bright and blinding. I wasn't sure how that would have happened because there was no real way to get ahead of this truck, get off the highway, and get back on fast enough to catch up with them, which made me wonder if I had a few bored ranch kids out joyriding and causing problems. I asked if he'd seen enough of the other vehicle to know what it was, so I could call in an APB. I knew it was a long shot because of the strength of the headlights, but figured I'd ask. Turns out he had, because the other car had gotten tired of riding his bumper and swerved left to come alongside him. Risky behavior, since he was running in the oncoming lane. But given that, so far, I hadn't been impressed with this troublesome driver's common sense. I also wasn't surprised. It was a blue car, an old late 50s Ford, which did surprise me. Most people with classic cars don't drive like maniacs. I had to ask if he'd gotten a look at the driver or passenger, and that's when his face went even paler. He looked so bloodless, I worried if he was having a heart attack. He'd seen the driver, but it couldn't have been real, he said, because real people don't look like that. He had to have been wearing a mask. From the description, it sounded like one hell of a Halloween mask. Hollow eyes, mouth open, melting flesh, and a permanent scream. Definitely not something you want to see driving alone in the middle of the night on a deserted road, where the loneliness makes even tough country boys think they're seeing crazy stuff. I walked back to my cruiser to call in an APB on a late 50s blue Ford sedan and let them know that the driver had been apparently wearing a Halloween mask before I went back to the stalled truck to see what I could do to get it going again. One tire change later, which the driver clearly could have done on his own, but apparently hadn't want to get out of his truck to do it while he was alone, and he was on his way. I sat in my cruiser for another minute, letting dispatch know that the stranded motorist was no longer stranded. The night was quiet, and the only thing on the road besides me was a bobcat that decided to cross the road. I was honestly surprised to hear the roar of an engine from somewhere behind me. It was a full throttle sound, getting louder and louder fast. I knew I couldn't be as lucky as all that whoever was playing tricks on the highway in the middle of the night would be trying this with a Texas state trooper. But then that engine roared, turning into a blazing bright headlights, just like the stranded driver had said. The car, definitely a 1950s Ford Edsel sedan, rocketed past me fast enough that the air displacement rocked my vehicle. I flipped on my lights and siren, peeled out, getting back on the road, and gunned it after that car. It was going 90 if it was going anything, and I had to work to catch up. Fortunately, my headlights were bright enough to make out the license plate, so I called it in to ask for a plate run. It wasn't a modern plate, which isn't unusual with a classic car, but is weird if you want to be able to drive the thing legally. Most people pull over when there's a marked cop chasing them. Not this guy. He just kept going, never letting up from that dangerous speed. I was grateful for the empty highway and the open stretch of land around us. I didn't want to think of how this would end if I couldn't stop him. I must have chased him for another 10 miles before dispatch got back to me that nothing had come up on the plate. The only record they had was over 50 years old. I knew I'd been lucky so far that no one else was driving this late at night, but that wasn't a guarantee that I was going to stay lucky. I knew I had to end this pursuit. I gunned my engine and was able to catch up to the Edsel. This close, I could see that the car wasn't just powdered blue. The paint was rusting in some spots, and the rear window was cracked. The driver's side mirror was hanging loose. It was a miracle it didn't fly off and hit me smack in the windshield. I could see movement through that cracked rear window, but it was hard to tell because of all the dirt on it. I pulsed the siren again, just in case the driver really didn't get the message, and then pulled into the oncoming lane in order to get ahead of him. It's a risky move, but I didn't see how I could stop him otherwise. I couldn't hear the radio chatter over the roar of that land boat's engine, but I was able to pull up alongside him. The side of the car was in worse shape than the rear had been. There were more rust spots, big ones. How this car was being held together was beyond me. I managed to get ahead of him and let him run up to my bumper so I could start applying the brakes for the both of us. But he slowed down just enough to make getting around me possible, and then we were back at it. Me chasing him down this lonely stretch of West Texas road. There was only one thing I could think of to do. I pulled up alongside him and forced him off the road. That Edsel went bouncing into the scrub at the side of the road. This driver given me nothing but trouble, and I was half expecting him to peel out and start the chase all over again. But the car didn't move. I made sure I parked my vehicle a bit behind him. If he ran again, at least he wouldn't be able to run me over. I approached the car with my weapon drawn. My instincts were howling at me that something was way off. The night was quiet, except for the pinging of the engines as they cooled, but I was sweating. As I approached the car, I realized I hadn't really seen the extent of damage to this thing. It was more holes than Cardati, and more orangey brown rust than powder blue paint. Windows were still dirty and cracked, though I couldn't easily see inside. I shouted for the driver to come out with their hands up, but there was no answer. There was nothing. No noise. Just those cooling car sounds and the background squawk of my radio. After a couple of minutes of a silent standoff, I decided to see if I could see the driver. I shouted at him that I was going to approach the vehicle and to keep his hands on the wheel. As I pulled my mag light off my belt, I brought my weapon and light together, so whatever I could see, I could also shoot as necessary. I swept the light up over the Edsel's body. In good light, the damage looked ridiculous, and into the back seat. If I'd thought that the exterior was damaged, I tell you, the interior was worse. It was a charred mess. I moved the light to the driver's side window. I could see through to the passenger side, where there were white cracked leather seats and some weird scraps of cloth that looked like they were torn from somebody's grandmother's cardigan. I moved my light right to see if I could spot the driver. All of a sudden, there was a face pressed against the dirty glass, narrow-eyed and tanned the way ranchers are, with slicked back hair in a style that hasn't seen use in over 70 years. He had been in his late teens or maybe early 20s at the most, and he stared at me with an absolutely dead expression. Behind him, in the dark car, I could see an orange glow start. There was no sign of flame from the engine. I couldn't figure out where it was coming from, but God's honest truth, I wasn't much thinking about how logical this was. The flame grew from a glow to a bonfire in the space of 2 breaths. I shouted at the kid to get out of there, but he just stared at me through that filthy window. I saw the fire fill the car impossibly fast, saw his hair catch, and suddenly his mouth opened in what had to be a blood-curdling scream. Except there was no sound. When the flesh started melting off his face, I was the one screaming, scrambling back to my cruiser. I don't know what I was going to do, and it was still completely quiet. No feel of heat, no roar of flame, no screaming, no nothing. Just a silent Texas spring night, and whatever was happening on the side of the highway to San Angelo. When I looked again, there was no sign of the 1950s powder blue Edsel, just a big scorch mark in the dirt on the side of the road. If I ever figured out what happened, maybe I'll tell you. But for now, I'm still trying to forget everything. I was working on a building site near the Mexican border. We were developing an area of land that had been bought dirt cheap. It was going to be some communal housing, I think. I didn't pay that much attention, to be honest. I was just there to lay the foundations and get the frame up. Whatever they did with it after was their business. I know there were a few guys on the crew who grew up on the res that wouldn't touch the project, said the land was cursed. I knew one of the guys pretty well and tried asking him what the whole thing was about. but he wouldn't say. He warned me not to take the job, but I needed the money. But I knew he did too, and it must have been something serious to make him back out. I'm not superstitious in any sense of the word, but there was something about this whole situation that just seemed wrong. It started with little things you might not notice if you weren't paying close attention. At first, it was snakes, harmless garter snakes, but they suddenly appeared all over the job site. They were everywhere, and they seemed to come out of nowhere. We would sometimes even find them in our vehicles at the end of the day. It was creepy, but we didn't think anything strange was going on. We all thought we just ran into an area with a large population of snakes, and that was it. It made it difficult to work sometimes. We were ready to pour the foundation, but we had to keep scooping snakes out of the way. Eventually there were just too many, and we poured over them. But there were other things as well. Sometimes you would look up, and it would seem like the sun was suddenly on the wrong side of the sky, or the sunset would come way too early or way too late. At first, I thought maybe my watch was acting up, but it was happening to some of the other guys too. There was this one time I was eating lunch in my truck, and as I stepped out to go back to work, the sky was suddenly dark, as if it was night. I didn't know what to think. I went back to my truck to get my flashlight, but as soon as I grabbed it, the sky was light again. The sun was directly overhead, just where it should be. The snake infestation lasted maybe a week, and they disappeared as suddenly as they had arrived. All of them were gone overnight. It was odd, but we were glad to have them gone. Even if you don't mind snakes, it was a little unnerving finding them in unexpected places. We had maybe 3 days from when the snakes disappeared to when the scorpions arrived. It was insane. Like the snakes, they showed up out of nowhere. We were completely overrun by these things, and I can tell you, I'd rather deal with harmless snakes than scorpions. It was so bad that we had to call off the job until a company came in to spray insecticide all over the place. It took 2 weeks until we could resume work again. The pest control company said they'd never seen anything like it. There were hundreds of scorpions, all in one place, that just kept appearing after several bouts of insecticide. By this point, some of the crew were talking about the guys from the res who bailed on the project. That, just maybe, they knew something we didn't. We continued on with the project anyway. A lot of us were there because we desperately needed money and couldn't afford to turn down a job, regardless of whatever rumors were going around about the land. We had 2 days of quiet on the job site, and on the third day, we were swarmed by cicadas. We all had to run to our vehicles. You couldn't see more than 12 inches in front of you. I had never seen anything like it in my life. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew something wasn't right. So did the rest of the crew. But no one wanted to say it first. I ended up tracking down my friend from the res and met him for a drink. I told him what was happening on the job, and he didn't seem surprised in the least. He told me he couldn't say the creature's name, because saying its name is as good as calling it to your front door. But he did tell me that it was evil, and if I had any sense, I would pack up my tools and leave. The job wasn't worth my life. I had a hard time believing his tale, but I knew in the pit of my stomach that he was right. And even if he wasn't, I wasn't keen to see what the next plague was going to be if I went back to the job site. I had quite a few tools left there that I had to pick up. I definitely wasn't going to lose my tools to this job, so I went back the next day. When I got there, I was completely alone. No one else had showed up for work either. It was dead quiet. The cicadas were gone without any trace of their existence. I started to pack up my tools, then load them into the back of my truck, when I saw something moving in the distance. It was a little gray blob, and it appeared to be coming towards me. I stopped what I was doing and focused my eyes on it until it came into view. It was a coyote, a single, lone coyote, and it was trotting straight towards me. I grabbed a hammer from my tool bag, just in case, The coyote stopped about 20 yards in front of me and sat down. It just stared at me. I continued putting the rest of my tools in the truck, never taking my eyes off the coyote. Likewise, it never took its eyes off of me either. Its eyes looked more human than coyote eyes. I had seen enough coyotes in my life to know that there was something strange about this one, and I didn't really want to find out what it was. I finished loading up my tools. The coyote was still sitting there, staring at me, and as I was about to step up into my truck, it looked at me, drew its head back, and laughed. I don't know what that thing was, but it was no coyote. I drove out of there and never went back. I've worked in construction since I was basically a kid. It's a lot of hard work, but my dad did it, and his dad did it too. I wouldn't be surprised if we had construction workers in our family through the colonization of this country. It pays the bills, and you learn a lot about discipline, I'd say. It really humbles a person. It has to. It's definitely not easy. I hope my kids get into it too, because I think they'd learn a lot when they come of age. I'd been doing construction for many, many years by the time we got the job to work at the Denver International Airport. I wasn't too interested about it at the time. I mean, I was happy to have a job, but I didn't think it would be as bizarre as it turned out to be. A lot of the time, we all minded our own business. We worked until it was time to go home, and that was it. There weren't any questions or speculating happening because we were there to get things done. We were far too busy to let things linger upstairs for too long, so we started work. We were the ones laying concrete. We'd spend a lot of time on the ground, on all fours. We had our noses down into the pavement, literally, for hours at a time. So it really isn't something that we do, looking around, observing, noticing unusual things. But I think the reason it became apparent, well, to me and a few others at least, was because we had spent years there, underground, laying concrete. So you start to become more at ease in the environment. You start to notice things. I honestly think that this was the longest project I had worked on. It took forever, it felt like. Well, that was until my team was no longer contracted to do any more work. We usually don't see the people involved with leading the project unless something terrible happens, or if it's a really small company that we were hired by. The big wigs don't usually come around because they're busy dealing with other things. So maybe that's what caught our attention. Seeing a bunch of suits down in those tunnels. It just wasn't normal. You know what I mean? The first time I saw them, there were about 5 of them. Every single one of them had on a black suit and a white shirt underneath with a black tie. They all looked like they were wearing identical suits. Literally. I really couldn't tell the difference between them, except a couple of them had darker hair than the rest. So anyway, I noticed them standing at the end of the tunnel, several yards away from where I'm kneeling. Mostly it was weird because they were whispering and pointing toward the direction we were working towards. I'm not sure what they were saying, but it made me feel a little weird. Like I said, they usually aren't too involved. But hey, maybe this group was. Maybe they liked being involved. Maybe they didn't have anything else to do. I guess it wasn't that weird at the time. But when they kept coming around, whispering behind us, we really weren't sure if they were chatting about the tunnel, or us, or the job we were doing, or all of the above. It makes you a little self-conscious, you know, not knowing what they are saying. But they keep coming around with not a single smile or friendly word. It kinda started to upset me, to tell you the truth. So me and the other guys started asking some questions. It was just among us, but questions still. Like I said before, we had been there a long time. We were making a tunnel that went so far out. I couldn't tell you where we ended up. All I know is my boss did mention that we'd be going toward a body of water, and I knew we were going south, a very straight path south. After being finished with the job, I looked up. The closest body of water south from the Denver International Airport is the Aurora Reserve. The reserve is a heaping 26 miles away from DIA. Why on earth would an airport need a tunnel that stretches 26 miles away from it? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I knew we had been down there a long time, but I didn't think we had been down there that long. Not 26 miles of concrete filling long. But of course, I didn't know that's how far we had been going at the time. And after we were mysteriously dismissed, who knows how much longer the next team continued. But anyway, me and the team were talking as often as we could, and in secret. One of my closest colleagues knew one of the guys on the other team, who mentioned that they had also seen some people like we had, just coming and going, and that they were doing odd things, like requesting rooms to be built within the tunnels. Maybe the rooms were for storage. I really don't know. But I think it's weird to start asking to build more rooms than originally had been planned before construction began. At least, I had never experienced anything like it. Rumors had started circulating about strange equipment being brought in completed areas of the tunnel. I don't know what the equipment was. All I know is that the place started to feel more and more odd as time went on. And then, without warning, after talking amongst ourselves, we weren't needed to work anymore. I suspect that someone on our team was telling the higher-ups about our gossiping. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've heard it before. I'm not a disgruntled ex-employee. I'm not upset that we weren't working at the airport anymore. To be honest, I was relieved that I didn't have to deal with the awkwardness of it all anymore. I don't know what was going on there. I never claimed to know. I just know what I had seen with my own eyes and felt in my own gut. And those things alone told me something strange was happening at the airport. I live in Daytona Beach, Florida, where we're famous for our beautiful beaches and being the shark capital of the world. I've always loved the ocean and surfing, and I've had a few close calls with sharks over the years, but nothing too serious. But the other day, I experienced something that changed my perspective forever. It was just a regular day, and I decided to head out for an early morning surf. The water was calm and inviting, and I paddled out to the lineup. I had been surfing for about an hour when I noticed a large shadow moving towards me. At first, I thought it was just a dolphin, but as it got closer, I realized it was something much bigger. I saw the creature break the surface of the water, and my heart merely stopped. It was at least 3 times the size of any shark I had ever seen before. I was in shock and didn't know what to do. I tried to remain calm and keep a level head, as they tell you to do in emergencies. But I was freaking out. This shark could have swallowed me whole and still had room for dessert. I dove off my board and abandoned it, something I never thought I would do in my entire life. I was panicking, and I quickly paddled towards the shore. I really thought the thing was going to bite my leg off, and I've seen sharks close to shore before, but never a big one, and certainly never one that big. I lost my board. It was a really nice one. My mom had gotten it for me for my birthday one year, and she didn't have any money. To this day, I don't know how she scraped enough money to get me on board that nice, but I'll have to take that secret to the grave. I can't bear the thought of telling her that I lost it. She might still be making payments on it all these years later. For the first time in my life, I lost the uncontrollable need to surf. I figured I was just in a bad mood for losing my surfboard. But every time I got close to the water, my hands would shake and I would get nauseous. That thing freaked me out so bad, I didn't know who I was anymore. If I wasn't a surfer, who was I? I kept coming every morning with my far less superior board, trying to work up enough nerves to get back into the water. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. To think that I had gotten so close to something so dangerous, so deadly, I'm not going to lie, it made me religious. Something or someone wanted me to live and talk about it. I bet most people that come that close to a shark that big never come home. I told my surfing buddies about the creature, and they all proceeded to tell me how crazy I was, or that they saw bigger sharks. It just became a stupid competition, and nobody took me seriously. I tried to plead with them that what I saw wasn't just a big shark. It had to have been 60 feet long. But you know how guys are. You can't just share a story without someone trying to one-up you. I called my girlfriend at the time up and tried to talk to her about it, and she told me I was out of my mind. She was more upset about the fact that I lost my board than the fact that I almost died. I'm dating her best friend now. Funny, the way things work out. The more the time went on, the more freaked out I became. I never got back into the water, and I haven't surfed since. I'll be honest, seeing that thing made me half the man I used to be. I don't know if I'll ever even swim in the ocean again. Just the thought of it makes me want to throw up. It's just gotten worse and worse. I've started having these awful nightmares. It starts off, I'm on my old board, just surfing, but something seems off. Then out of nowhere, I'll see that shark again, just like I saw him in real life. Then he'll rip into me and tear off my limbs. I had a couple of nightmares that my mom will be surfing and the shark will brutally massacre her, and I will try and run into the water to save her, but it's like I'm running in slow motion. I always feel so helpless and vulnerable in those dreams, and it's really horrifying. I wonder if I need to go see a therapist or something. Every time I have one of those dreams, which is far too often, I wake up in a panic. My bed sheets are soaked with sweat, and I can't get back to sleep and have to walk around the house to calm myself down. It's really taken a toll on my sanity. I spent hours researching online, trying to find any information about the creature I had seen. Based on the size and physical features, I came to the conclusion that it must have been a megalodon. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. Megalodons were massive prehistoric sharks that could grow up to 60 feet in length. They went extinct millions of years ago, but some people still believe that they exist in the deep ocean. There are megalodon sightings all the time. And do we really know what's going on in the ocean? We've barely even been to the bottom. If anyone has any other theories, I'm all ears. But I've never heard of a scientifically proven case of a shark that was the size of this thing. The only reasonable explanation is that I came face to face with a megalodon. When I was a kid, my dad got me a megalodon tooth for Christmas. At the time, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, but now I can't even look at it. It's awful because that's the only thing I have to remember my dad by. This whole experience has been so traumatizing. I was visiting my aunt and uncle, who live in an old farmhouse in Minnesota that has been in the family for generations. The house is in the middle of nowhere, with nobody around for miles. It's surrounded by cornfields and woods, and when I visited as a child, it was always a really peaceful and quiet place. The last time I visited, though, I had an experience that I will never forget. I was sitting in the living room watching some TV around midnight. My family had already gone to bed. I was about to call it a night when I saw something move by the window outside. I kind of assumed it was some kind of animal, since there were always animals hanging around there. But I went to the window to see if I could figure out what it was. Then I saw this black shadowy figure standing in the middle of the cornfield. This freaked me out, so I grabbed my uncle's shotgun that he kept over the fireplace, and I ran out there. When I got outside, though, there was nobody to be found. I couldn't sleep that night, and I just kept staring out the window, but I didn't see anything else for the remainder of the night. The next morning, I sat down to breakfast with my uncle and aunt, but I couldn't get the image of the shadowy figure out of my head. I hadn't slept a wink, and I was paranoid as hell, but I tried to act as normal as possible. As we ate, I finally mustered up the courage to ask my uncle if he knew of anyone who might be wandering around the cornfields at night. He gave me a strange look and asked why I wanted to know. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether or not to tell him the truth, but finally, I decided to come clean. I told him about the shadowy figure that I had seen the night before, and his face turned white, and my aunt left the room. He told me that the closest house was like 10 miles away, and that nobody ever came around there. When he asked if I had seen anything weird, I told him I saw someone standing in the cornfield. My uncle angrily screamed at me, saying it was my imagination, and he went out the front door, got in his truck, and took off down the road. My aunt tried to cheer me up with a piece of her famous homemade pumpkin pie, but now I was at the point I just wanted to get the hell out of there. A little later on, I walked over to the cornfield where I had seen the person the night before. I slowly walked around and scanned the ground for any footprints or signs of activity. I even got down on my hands and knees, searching for any clues, but there was nothing. The mud was smooth and undisturbed, and the only footsteps I could see were my own and the occasional animal print. I couldn't explain what I was feeling, but I knew that something was not right. I had this eerily feeling in my chest, felt like I was being watched, and I started to get really nauseous. I told my aunt I was going to head back early, but she pleaded with me to stay and apologized for my uncle's behavior. I forget which piss-poor excuse she gave me for him talking to me like that, but for her sake, I tried to brush it off and act like nothing happened. Of course, like a macho man who has repressed his feelings his whole life, my uncle returned later that night and talked to us like nothing happened. Like he hadn't just screamed like a maniac for me being concerned for our safety. Over the next few days, I continued to see the shadowy figure standing in the same spot in the cornfield, night after night. It was always there. It was obvious to me now it wasn't a human being, but a dark, shadowy figure, perhaps a spirit. Whatever the hell it was, I knew it was dangerous. Every time I saw it, I would run up the door after it, but it always disappeared before I could get a good look. It's like it knew that I was coming and was deliberately evading me. The frustration and fear built up inside of me until I was on the verge of a breakdown. And the worst part was I had nobody to talk to about it. My uncle definitely didn't want to talk about it. My aunt pretended like everything was fine. And every time I had my parents on the phone, my aunt and uncle would hover around, ensuring that I didn't say anything other than I was having an amazing time. What a freaking nightmare. One night I heard something right outside of the window of the room I was sleeping in. I looked out and I saw the figure standing close to the window, looking in at me. I could vaguely see through it, but it was defined enough so I knew it was a head and hands peering in at me. I was terrified. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then the figure just vanished, and I was finally able to scream. My aunt and uncle ran into the room and asked me what was wrong. I was shaking and crying, but I managed to let them know through gasps what had happened. My aunt and uncle looked at each other for a while. Then my uncle told me to come into the living room. He poured the both of us some whiskey, and he told me about how they've had a problem with the shadow people for years. I was in shock. He chugged the whole glass, chugged another, and then started sobbing. He then proceeded to tell me about how the shadow people almost drove their marriage apart. He said that at first, my aunt was seeing them, and they thought that she was losing her mind. She spent some time in a psych ward, and they thought she was making a lot of progress. When she returned home, she immediately started seeing them again, and my uncle didn't believe a word of it. My uncle then chugged another glass and looked at me right in the eyes. Then he told me about how recently he awoke to a shadow person choking him. He suffered a heart attack and almost died. He told me he never admitted it to anyone, as he thought he was now going insane. It took a lot of convincing from everyone in the family, but finally, my aunt and uncle agreed to sell that house and move closer to where my parents live. To this day, my uncle refuses to even acknowledge the shadow people. But I'm here to tell you, they are here, and they are dangerous. I still freeze up every time I even think about it. It was insanely traumatizing. To this day, I'm still not sure what creature I encountered. It was late in the summer, and me and my significant other had decided to drive up to my family's cabin one last weekend. We ended up taking separate cars since they got off of work late. I got to the cabin around 3 p.m. and unloaded a few things and took a look around. There were a few other cabins within walking distance from ours, but no one seemed to be home. I thought to myself, well, good. That way we don't have to worry about anyone else being loud. The neighbors directly across from us had kids in college, and they often used the cabin to party. So I was relieved that they weren't there. Once I settled in, I got the fire pit started, and I figured I'd kill some time and read for a bit. After an hour or so, I put out the fire pit and went back inside to tidy up before my significant other came. There was plenty of tidying up I had to do around the house. After what seemed like an hour, I was finally ready to prepare dinner. While gathering everything I needed, I remembered I left my canned ingredients in my car, so I went out to get them. By this time, the sun was starting to creep behind some clouds before nightfall. When I walked outside, I came to find the fire pit was still on. I went to turn it off, then started questioning why it was on again. I swore I turned it off before heading inside. I shrugged it off, thinking I must have thought I put it out completely, and didn't. After I grabbed what I needed from my car and processed what had just happened, I started to hear music. I glanced over, and to my surprise, the rowdy neighbors across the way just pulled up to the cabin. I laughed to myself, thinking, now they're going to be loud all night. At the same time, I was relieved since my partner hadn't arrived yet, and I wasn't totally alone. After I went in to finish preparing dinner, my significant other texted that they would be there soon, so I went back outside to turn the fire pit on. I sat in my chair, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing at my neighbor's. I squinted beyond the fire, trying to make out who it was. It seemed to be the silhouette of a man, so I waved, believing it to be my neighbor. The figure paused briefly before waving back. I thought to myself, it's too dark and late, but whoever it is, I'll be sure to greet them tomorrow. My partner arrived shortly after, and we went to bed. I woke up around midnight and went to the kitchen to get some water. From the window, I could see the neighbors across the way sitting in the hot tub and playing music. I thought to myself, they probably won't be up early enough for me to greet them in the morning, so I'll go later on in the evening. We didn't know our neighbors all too well, but when either of us were at the cabin, both families greeted each other out of courtesy. Me and my partner spent that morning exploring before we returned to the cabin. After showering and settling in for the evening, I remembered I was supposed to go say hello to the neighbors. It was around 3 p.m. when I knocked on their door. Usually, I hear movement, like someone on their way to answer, but It was silent. I glanced at their driveway and saw their cars, so I knew they were still here. I assumed they must have been up all night and were still sleeping, or went off to explore the trails. Either way, it didn't seem alarming, so I decided to go back. When I turned to head back, I noticed footprints on the ground. I looked across the way to see my fire pit. That would have meant this is where I saw my neighbor standing last night. I examined the footprint I saw, and it looked to be like a human print, but bigger. I started to grow worried, thinking it's possible this print belonged to a bear. It wasn't common for bears to be in that area, but it had happened before. I went to knock on their door again, wanting to warn them to be cautious. This time, I was knocking louder, and the door swung open a bit. I immediately turned back, glancing at my cabin, thinking I should ask my partner to come check it out with me. I hesitated, but for time's sake, in my growing worry, I decided to peek inside. I went in quietly, glancing around, trying to think of what I'd say to the neighbor if they caught me in their cabin. After I looked through 3 out of the 4 rooms, I came to the conclusion they weren't here, so they had to be out exploring. I don't know what it was, but I felt obligated to check that 4th room. I walked down the hall to it, and as I approached the room, there was a smell that seemed out of place. I opened the door and saw the room was completely trashed. The sheets on the bed and the mattress itself were shredded up, like some wild dog got inside and tore it apart. The more I looked around, I thought, let me clean some of it up, because they may suspect I trashed the room if they catch me in here. I began pulling up blankets and fluff, and noticed red gunk. I pulled up more from that area, and dropped everything, and froze when I saw animal remains of a leg. Chills went through my body, and I walked backwards until I was wedged behind the door. I couldn't move after that, and stood there, petrified. I could hear trotting coming from downstairs, like something was running fast. Although I could hear it, I couldn't move. I didn't know who or what was going to come through that door. My eyes widened as a tall, furry-looking beast sniffed around the sheets. The creature dug around where I had seen the foot. It snarled, and I heard it crunching on the leg, much like a dog does when it gets a bone. Luckily, it took what it wanted and ran away, not even knowing that I was there. I was in so much shock and was still processing what I saw. The only thing that snapped me out of it is when my significant other pulled me out of the cabin. When we got back to our cabin, I didn't say anything for the first half hour. Eventually, I told my significant other what I saw, and they convinced me it was best to not mention anything to the neighbors. Later on in the evening, when I had a chance to calm down, we heard the neighbors return home. This time, it wasn't loud music we heard, but cries. I came to find out they left their dog behind at home. To think I saw the dog's remains, but couldn't offer them any closure on the matter given the situation. For the longest time, I wanted to tell them what had happened, but how could I? I want to tell you a story that happened to me when I was living in Wisconsin a few years back. One night when I was sleeping, I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. I was half asleep, but also fully aware of the noise that I had just heard. So I grabbed a loaded shotgun I keep under the bed and ran out of the bedroom. I headed towards the front of the house, where I heard the sounds of a burglar trying to break in. I saw that the window in the dining room had been bashed in, and it was obvious that whoever broke the glass was already inside. I tried to stay calm, be as quiet as possible, and get rid of the threat. I'm not going to lie though, I was scared. I took cover underneath the dining room table and aimed towards the living room. After not hearing anything for a while, I made my way towards the living room, being as tactical as possible. My instructor told me to make myself as small of a target as possible, so I was using the angles to my advantage and holding the corners close. I peeked around the living room door and scanned the room. The whole room was a wreck. The couches were ripped up, the tables were overturned, the paintings were knocked down, and there was broken glass all over the place. The person was ransacking the house for valuables. It was obvious. All of a sudden, I heard the perpetrator upstairs, unleashing unholy hell in my man cave. That's where all my good stuff was, and nobody was going to take any of that stuff alive. I ran up the stairs and ran into the man cave, ready to blast the thief full of lead. But the window up there was bashed in, and the criminal had escaped. The man cave is pretty high up, so I expected to see a mangled body on the ground, but there was nothing there. I looked up and saw my barn door was wide open. That's where my chickens are. Nobody messes with my chickens. I was pissed off. I ran down the stairs, out the back door, and towards the barn. As I looked through the door, I saw my chickens were savagely butchered. Blood and feathers were all over the barn floor, and the chicken cages were mangled beyond recognition. This freaked me out, and now I wasn't sure if I was dealing with a person or not. Then I heard my horse squeal. My horse was my life, man. I love that horse more than anything on this earth. I can't describe how I felt when I heard her cry. I sprinted towards the stable as fast as I could. There on the ground, in a pool of blood, was Sugar, my beloved friend. She had bite marks all over her, and she was ripped open. I blacked out. And then the next thing I remember, the police came. The police said it must have been a bear or a wolf, but that's ridiculous. This thing destroyed so much in such a short amount of time. It had to be some sort of freak beast, and it was intelligent too. It knew where all my animals were and murdered them so quickly and efficiently. It had to be supernatural. There was no way any animal I know of could have done this. I hired a paranormal investigator to give me some closure, which turned out to be a complete waste of time. They claimed the demon was punishing me for the way I lived my life. This was no demon. It was clearly some sort of huge creature. And to save everyone some time, Earl's Paranormal Services in Wisconsin is an absolute scam. I've done a lot of research into what the creature could have been. A friend of mine said a Bigfoot could have done it, but from what I've researched, a Bigfoot doesn't seem agile and intelligent enough. I'm convinced it was a werewolf. Werewolves are human, so when they turn into a werewolf, the human mind is still somewhere in their subconscious. I'm thinking this was a rival egg merchant. My chickens produce the best damn eggs in Wisconsin, and I gave them away for a bargain. I'm thinking someone wanted a cut of that egg action, and when they turned into a werewolf, their desire became reality. I don't know why he had to hurt Sugar, though. Sugar never did anything wrong to anybody. I really miss that horse. I can't bring myself to get another one. A werewolf would have the strength required to bash the window in and kill my animals in one swoop, while also having the agility to run down the halls and jump out of the window unharmed. The chicken cages were bent by bite marks, and the beast devoured 30 freaking chickens in the minute it took me to sprint over to the barn. Please share some wisdom with me and help me figure this thing out. Should a beast like this come to my new house, I'm definitely prepared. But it's not knowing that is the worst. It had to be heartless and evil to kill Sugar like that. Almost like it knew how much I loved that horse. If you have any idea what this could be, please give me a call. I'm desperate for answers. Just don't tell me it's Bigfoot though. That's a bunch of malarkey, and I won't entertain it. When I was a kid, my dad built me this wonderful tree house. I'd seen them in the movies and TV shows. and I wanted one more than anything in the world. I never wanted to leave it. I'd spent many nights in the treehouse before, without any issue. I'd even have sleepovers with school friends there. My mom never liked me sleeping in there, but as long as it wasn't a school night, and it was warm enough, my dad would step in and say, "It's fine." One summer, I remember spending every night for a week out there, until my mom told me I needed to come inside. I was a bit of a wild child, so I'd sneak out to be out there after she fell asleep. I just enjoyed the peace of nature. I loved hearing the crickets chirp and seeing the lightning bugs. I always thought that nature was kind of magical. One of those nights during the summer, I was up in the treehouse reading with my flashlight. I'd snuck out through my bedroom window around 11 p.m. to go up there, and my parents were both asleep in bed. I heard a quiet rustling in the woods. I didn't think much of it. There were tons of deer and other wildlife around us, so I assumed it must have been something like that. I peeked through the window in my treehouse to take a quick look. I didn't see anything when I looked, and I chalked it up to a deer running away. I kept reading my book. I didn't hear anything else for a while. About an hour passed, and I was really getting to a good spot in the book. I started to smell something weird. It was rotten and smelled really coppery, like old hamburger meat. I pinched my nose, thinking it would go away soon, but it only got stronger. I felt nauseous smelling it. The thing about sneaking out of my bedroom window was that I couldn't sneak back through it. As much as I wanted to go inside to avoid it, I couldn't. I'd have to wait for my parents to wake up so I could go in the front door. I covered my head with my blanket and hoped it would go away soon, because I definitely wouldn't be able to sleep with the stench. The woods were quiet, and out of nowhere, I heard a shrill scream. I sat up quickly, and I looked out the window. It was steady and loud. It sounded mechanical almost, kind of like how people sound in demon movies, when there are two voices talking. It died down after a minute, and I kept my eyes on the woods where it came from. It couldn't have been a deer, and I've never heard of any other animal make that noise. I saw in the tree line something very tall moving. I hadn't noticed it at all until it moved, but I'd been staring right at it. I jumped back and turned off my lantern so it wouldn't see me. I hid under the blankets again, and I hoped I could wait it out until the morning without whatever that was seeing me. But I heard quiet footsteps approach the treehouse. The screaming noise sounded again, but this time it was much closer. I needed to get inside desperately. I peeked through the blanket, hoping my dad heard the noise and was investigating it. Thankfully, I saw my parents' bedroom light come on, and a wave of relief filled me. I thought I'd run down and knock on the front door, let them know I was outside. I started making my way down the ladder, and I saw a tall creature with completely hollow eyes start moving toward me. It was terrifying to look at. I climbed back up the ladder as quickly as I could and started screaming at the top of my lungs. I was yelling for my mom and dad, hoping they would run outside and be able to bring me in. After a minute, the porch light came on and my dad ran out in his boxers, carrying a baseball bat. I screamed for him and jumped out of my treehouse. He met me halfway and carried me back to the porch. I told him what I'd seen, and he looked around quickly, not able to see anything, though he complained it smelled like rotten eggs around the treehouse. I explained it over and over to them, but they just thought it was a dream of mine. What I never understood about that was, they heard the scream too. That's why they got up to begin with. I was banned from ever sleeping in my treehouse again, which wasn't an issue with me at all. I never wanted to see it again. My parents thought I was hallucinating or hearing things every time I told them. I started to believe it too. I heard the screaming a few more times, It was further into the woods, and I'd never seen the creature again. But I knew it was still lurking in the woods. I didn't like going outside at night after that. I loved it so much before, but after, I'd only go out during the day. I tried to talk to some school friends about it, but they didn't believe me either. I almost wish I could get a better glimpse of it, to be able to describe it better, or show someone else, to prove I'm not insane. So, my spouse surprised me with a trip to France, and I was like, sweet. Ever since we first started dating, we talked about going to France. We just never got around to it because my spouse's mom got sick, and she lived with us until she died. And then my spouse got sick. It's a whole long sad story that I'm not going to go into. But my spouse said that before she kicked the bucket, she wanted to go to France with me, which I thought was freaking awesome. Something we'd always dreamed of doing, and to be honest, I never thought it was going to happen. I'll never forget that trip for a lot of different reasons, but something happened to me down there that changed me forever. We were having a great time exploring the countryside and stuff, but one day, things took a weird turn. My spouse wasn't feeling so hot, and she just wanted to stay in bed. So, instead of doing all the things we planned to do together, I decided to go on a boat ride in the countryside by myself to take in the sights. Now, I'm not usually one to believe in crazy stuff, but what happened that day was like something out of a movie. I saw these massive sea serpent-looking things swimming alongside me. I was like, what the hell is that? I tried to stay as still and quiet as I possibly could as these things glided by me in the water. They were like nothing I had seen before. I'm telling you, they were massive, with these long, scaly bodies that looked like they went down deep below the surface of the water. They each had these long teeth, so sharp they could probably slice through steel. They all made this hissing sound that together was the scariest thing I've ever heard. I've been bitten a lot by snakes as a kid, but these things could have eaten me alive. Their skin was this deep shade of green, almost like the color of algae, but with hints of blue and gray mixed in. And the scales, oh man, the scales looked rough and jagged, like these things had been in some gnarly fights. Every time they moved, it was like they were creating some kind of whirlpool, sucking everything around them into their path. The craziest and creepiest thing about these guys is they all moved in unison. It was like they were all part of the same creature, even though there were multiple heads and bodies, and every time they moved, it was like the water around them churned and frothed. It was freaking bizarre. It was like a train wreck. I wanted to cower in my boat, but I couldn't look away. These sea serpent creatures were like something out of a freaking nightmare. One thing's for sure, I'm never going on a boat ride again. That's for damn sure. I tried to tell my spouse about it later, but they were just sick, like, sure honey, and went back to sleep. I didn't see those things again after that, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like, what the hell was that? I needed to know more. So I started talking to some of the locals, and they had all of these stories about river monsters and stuff. And some of them were like, nah, that's just a myth. But others were like, oh yeah, I've seen them too. After the initial shock wore off, I did what any normal person would do and hopped on my laptop to figure out what the hell I saw. That's what I learned about sea serpents, the Greek hydra, and this thing called the Allier River Monster, which was relatively close to where I took the boat. So get this, everyone's heard of sea serpents before, I had never heard of the Hydra, or the Allier River Monster, or this Japanese creature called Orochi. The freaky thing about these guys is that they are all one creature with multiple heads. From the second I saw the picture of the Allier River Monster, my heart freaking sank. It was so hard to believe that something like this existed, but I saw it with my own two eyes. The weirdest thing about these serpent things was how they all moved together, and after reading all about these guys, it made a lot of sense. They weren't moving together. They were all one giant, terrifying creature. I gotta tell ya, I'm so freaking grateful that those sea serpent creatures didn't kill me right then and there. I mean, I was scared out of my freaking mind when I saw them, but looking back on it now, it's like, holy crap, I could have died. I guess I should count myself lucky that I made it out alive. It's funny. It used to drive my spouse absolutely nuts when I talked about seeing the creature. She always said it was probably just a bunch of snakes or something, but deep down, I think she was jealous that she didn't see it for herself. God rest her soul. She was a good woman. I miss her every day, you know. But I tell you what, I'm so glad we got to France before it was all over. That trip was one of the best things that ever happened to me, and besides seeing the snake thing, it was a beautiful experience. And seeing the beast was scary as hell, but it was also like this big adventure, you know? Like who knows what else is out there in the world that we don't know about. It's really exciting when you think about it. Seeing something like that will make you feel so small and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It's so arrogant to assume that we know everything about the universe. We definitely don't. And that experience solidified that thought in my mind forever. A couple of years ago, my friend Dave had an encounter that changed his life forever. Dave was an avid outdoorsman who spent his weekends hiking and exploring the deep woods near his hometown in Oregon. He had a particular interest in wildlife, and he had set up several trail cameras throughout the forest to capture pictures of the local fauna. One weekend, Dave ventured out into the woods to retrieve the SD cards from his trail cams. He was eager to see what creatures he had captured on film, as he often found pictures of deer, raccoons, and even the occasional coyote. Back at home, Dave loaded the first SD card onto his computer and began flipping through the images. It was the usual mix of critters and woodland scenes, but as he clicked through, one photo caught his attention. The image showed a creature that Dave had never seen before. It was tall and bipedal, with long muscular limbs and a hunched posture. Its body was covered in thick matted fur, and its face had a distinctly ape-like appearance. The creature seemed to be looking directly at the camera, its eyes reflecting this eerie glow. Dave was at a loss for words. He knew that the Pacific Northwest was famous for its Sasquatch sightings, but he had never believed in the creature himself. Yet, there it was, staring back at him from his computer screen. Dave reached out to a few friends who were also interested in the subject, sharing the photo and his story. Soon enough, word spread, and the image began circulating online. Skeptics questioned its authenticity, while believers saw it as undeniable proof of the elusive creature's existence. Over the following months, Dave became obsessed with finding more evidence of the creature. He had to capture it on film. He spent countless hours in the woods, setting up more trail cams and even trying to find physical traces of the mysterious being. Dave's trail cam photo ignited a firestorm of debate and fascination in the world of cryptozoology. Whether or not the creature in the image is truly the legendary Bigfoot, Dave's incredible backstory continues to captivate people and fuel their curiosity about the undiscovered mysteries that may still lurk in the depths of our forests. A few years back, a talented nature photographer named Sarah had an experience that left her both excited and dumbfounded. Sarah was well known for her stunning images of wildlife and landscapes, as she had traveled to remote regions all over the world in search of the perfect shot. One summer, Sarah decided to explore the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. Having heard countless stories of Sasquatch sightings in the area, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity about this creature, even though she remained skeptical about its existence. Sarah spent days trekking through the forest, capturing breathtaking images of lush greenery, cascading waterfalls, and the diverse wildlife that called the area home. One morning, as she hiked along a secluded trail, she heard a series of strange guttural vocalizations echoing through the trees. Her curiosity piqued. She cautiously followed the sounds, and her camera was at the ready. As she rounded the bend in the trail, she saw this massive hairy creature standing near a clearing. It was at least 8 feet tall, with long arms and distinctly ape-like face. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. She was staring at a real-life Bigfoot, her adrenaline pumping. She quickly snapped the photo before the creature had a chance to disappear. To her amazement, it didn't flee immediately. Instead, it paused for a moment, seemingly studying her with its dark, intelligent eyes. Sarah managed to take a second photo, just as the creature turned and vanished into the underbrush. Shaken but exhilarated, she returned to civilization, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just witnessed. She shared the incredible photos with a close friend, and soon the images went viral, sparking debates among enthusiasts and skeptics alike. Today, Sarah still continues to travel and photographs nature's wonders, but her chance encounter with the Sasquatch remains the most remarkable experience of her career. I grew up in New York City and was always told by my adopted parents not to believe in anything paranormal, like aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, and all that kind of stuff. But one day, I saw something that changed my beliefs. It was the first time I saw the faceless suited men. I was in the financial district. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I'm just an average guy living in the city. I work as a delivery man, and I just try to make ends meet. I live paycheck to paycheck, and frankly, I don't have the time of day to stir up stories or blather on like those wackadoos on the street screaming the end is near. I've never been one for conspiracy theories or anything like that, but ever since I first saw these faceless suited men, I can't help but feel like there's a lot going on that we have no idea about. I feel crazy even writing about this, but I'm telling you, look out for these guys. They're dangerous. The first time I saw them, I was making a delivery to a high-rise office building in the financial district. As I walked into the lobby, I saw a group of men in black suits and sunglasses. But when I looked closer, I realized they had no faces. It really freaked me out. I started to notice these faceless suited men all over the city. They were always in groups, and I couldn't help but feel like they were up to something. I started to check things out and even followed them a few times, but they always seemed to know that I was there and would disappear down a street. As I continued to look into it, I started to notice that the faceless suited men were always around areas of political and financial power, like government buildings and rich people places. It made me feel like they were part of some larger conspiracy to take over the city. I tried not to involve anyone else in this. I was too scared of what might happen if I did. But I did start to see other people noticing the faceless suited men too. It was like we were all part of a secret club too afraid to talk about what we were seeing. As time went on, my fear and anxiety grew. I started to see these faceless suited men in my dreams. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me. I knew I had to uncover the truth. I was constantly looking over my shoulder and could never shake the feeling that I was being followed. They never beat me up or anything like that, but I was always scared that something might happen to me if I got too close to the truth. I started to do my own research on them. I read every conspiracy theory I could find and even started to look into the history of New York City. That's when I stumbled upon something called the Men in Black. They were said to be government agents who covered up evidence of extraterrestrial encounters. It wasn't until I started to research the Men in Black that I realized the faceless suited men might be part of something larger. I still don't know exactly what they are, but I'm convinced they're not human. I believe these guys are part of some larger conspiracy to take over the city, and maybe even the world. Whether they're part of the government or something more sinister, I don't know, but they're definitely not human. I still haven't found the full truth behind the Men in Black, but I do know that they are part of something bigger than I ever imagined. After months of research, I discovered that there were others who had seen these men too, but were too afraid to speak out. I found online forums where people shared their experiences and theories. I even reached out to some of them. It turns out these Men in Black have been spotted all over the country, not just in New York City. Some believe that they're part of a secret government agency, while others think they're actually extraterrestrial beings. There are even those who claim that the faceless suited men are members of a secret society that controls the entire freaking world. As for me, I still don't know what to believe. All I know is that these men are real, and they're up to something. I've seen them in places where they shouldn't be, and I've heard things that make my blood run cold. I've tried to document their movements and patterns, but they always seem to be one step ahead of me. Despite my best efforts, I still haven't been able to stop the Men in Black from doing whatever it is they're doing. I've tried to raise awareness, but no one seems to believe me. I've even gone to the police, but they just laughed and told me to stop wasting their time. At this point, I've come to accept that there are things in this world that we may never understand. I'll continue to keep an eye for these freaky, faceless suited men, but I know that I can't do it alone. I hope someday that someone will uncover the truth behind these mysterious figures and put an end to whatever it is they're planning. I can't help but wonder how many other strange phenomena are out there that we don't know about. Growing up, my adopted parents always told me to only believe in proven science, and everything else was nonsense. But after seeing these Men in Black, these faceless freaks, I don't know what to believe anymore. What I do know is that there's more to this world than meets the eye. We may never know all the answers, but that shouldn't stop us from asking questions and seeking the truth. Maybe someday we'll finally uncover the secrets that have been hidden from us for so long. I remember growing up next to this strange building. I lived in the suburbs, and I had neighborhood friends. Mostly, I was friends with this person who had lived in the same cul-de-sac as me. But one night in particular, my friend asked me if I knew about this building on the other side of the creek. Our houses were, like I said, in a cul-de-sac. And on one side of this row of houses, my house was in this row, was a creek. So from my backyard, I could see some of this area. And beyond that was this strange place, according to my friend. I asked my friend what made it strange. He responded, with the things that go on there, how could it not be strange? I really wasn't sure what he meant. I hadn't seen anything unusual myself, and according to him, I lived much closer to it. But I was curious, so I asked. And he said that the building was never open during the day. It was only used at night, and that it had these strange symbols placed in a straight line at the top right of only one side of the building. And they explained that strange men were seen going in and out of the place, wearing strange attire. To me, it sounded like this story was built on a wild imagination of a kid, so I really wasn't sure what to think. But my friend told me to wait until it got dark, to look out towards the creek, and I would see bonfires and strange activity. So I waited, and sure enough, just as the sky got dark, I peeked through my fence and saw several areas that seemed like they were lit by fire. Now, I couldn't see much. I was looking through my fence and some trees that surrounded the creek, but there certainly were some fires. The next day I told my friend that I saw some fires beyond the creek, but I also told him that it didn't mean anything. My friend assured me that I was right, that it didn't prove anything, but he thought we should go to the creek that night so we could get a closer look at whatever might be going on at that building. I agreed. Obviously, I was skeptical, but I was also very interested and excited about what we might find. It was literally one of those kid adventures you see in the movies, but it was happening to us in real life. What kid doesn't want something like that to happen to them? As soon as it got dark, I snuck out of my house. I ran down the sidewalk to my friend's house. He said that we should wear all black. My friend and I got together. We tried not to make too much noise as we headed down the street to the creek. Luckily, it was going into late fall. Not too many people were out anymore. We got to the creek. I could see some of the building. My friend suggested that we stay a little back to hide ourselves in some trees. I thought it was a great idea, so we both got down in a squatting position. This was the first time I could actually see the building as clearly as I did. I could see that it was a very simple rectangle shape, but it was taller than it was wide. It was made out of some type of gray bricks, and just as my friend had mentioned, the building had some strange symbols on it. It had a strange eye-shaped thing. It had a snake. It had one of those things we used in school. I believe it was called a compass. And it also had a 5-pointed star with a circle around it, a pentagram. I asked my friend if they knew what it meant. He said he had no idea, and then asked if I thought it was weird. It was very weird. I wish I knew what it was trying to tell us. I was a kid at the time. I didn't know what half of the stuff was called, but just as I started to inspect the building further, which, by the way, had not a single window, I noticed that several cars all start to park in the parking lot. The only thing that separated us from the parking lot was an old wired fence. So this was a bit nerve-wracking. Sure enough, people in really strange hats started piling out of the cars and lining up at the side of the building. Many of the people were men, but I spotted 2 women. They all had really nice cars, and the women were wearing these really fancy dresses. Their hats were tall and sat in the center of their heads. I couldn't make out the color. It was either red or purple, I couldn't tell. And none of them were speaking loudly enough for us to hear anything. A couple of the men started lighting these weird things that looked like metal trash cans with fire. There were 6 in total, and as soon as they finished, everyone did some sort of weird bow, then started walking inside the building. We didn't see much else that night. It started getting too late to stay much longer, but I'd say the people arrived around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and they were still inside past 11. I thought maybe it was some sort of party, but my friend said that this would happen at least once a week, like it was a meeting or something. I tried asking my dad about it a few times. He'd usually reply that the building wasn't owned by anyone in town, and that it hadn't been used for several years. But I knew that it had been. I'm not sure what would happen inside that building, but I did find it to be very unusual.